Welcome to day 13 of the Media and Digital Platforms Market Inquiry public hearings. In the last few hours before your Human Rights Day holiday, we've got Omnicom Media Group first, which is a media agency. We then have RTB House, which is a demand-side platform in the ad tech stack, and then we have Primedia running from 4 to 6. So I want to first welcome Leilana Visser, who's the head of digital at the Omnicom Media Group, South Africa Pty Limited. Welcome, Leilana.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting us to partake in the commission.
Great. I believe you've got a presentation, so we'll let you run through that uninterrupted, and then we'll have questions for you. We've only got an hour, so I don't want to rush you, but let's say max 20, 30 minutes, and then we can have questions.
Perfect. And I do understand that from a team perspective, you guys have been killed by death of PowerPoint. So I'm going to make this as painful as possible, just running through the slides based on the questions that was posed to the Omnicom Media Group South Africa, and then we'll take it from there. Okay. First things first, just a little bit about myself. I've been with the OMG Group for a substantial amount of years. In essence, some people kind of refer that I've reached my expiry date in digital, which I don't fully agree to, seeing that I was born and bred when digital predominantly started in South Africa. So I joined the group plus minus about 20 years ago, and way back when we were branded as OMD, which is predominantly, it was South Africa's biggest buying agency, traditional buying agency in South Africa. It then transpired into more of a digital sphere, and I believe it might be part of my previous experience from a previous agency, where tracking was then available in the African market, but through boxes in radio advertising. So they were called listening tools within Africa. That obviously sparked interest of tracking and the ability to share information, quality information back to client. So plus minus about 16 years ago, our team leaders, Josh Dobie and Gary Westwater, came back from head office Omnicom in London, and we were allowed to put up our hands for digital. Obviously, because of the history, like I said, very much interested in the tracking and monitoring aspect of it. So started afresh with the agency within the OMG Group, and then started small baby steps, like I said, with regards to the rest of the industry as well. During that period, we heavily relied on search engines, predominantly Google search by then, to identify and to guide us what digital media is. Just as an example, what is an impression, how elements can actually be tracked and monitored. Over the last 16 years, grown within, and is very fortunate within the group that I was given the ability to grow, not only within the agency itself and within the clients, but also within the digital ecosystem. So from a digital maturity level, we have grown from both an agency as well as a technology stack perspective. Just a little bit something about myself that I would wanted to share with you guys. Just some recap, like I said, from spreading back all the way back from an OMG perspective. OMG was born full service media agency in South Africa. We offer currently traditional media above the line, digital as well as below the line media services, bucketed down into budget management, campaign management, market research. So all of these elements are covered and handled within the internal media space, within the agency itself. And our value proposition is best summarized with regards to our professionalism services delivered to our clients. And once again, going back to an OMD culture that was born and bred into the OMG culture, very much still tech heavy in the sense of adoption and maturity, but we've been fortunate that we've never left behind the strong culture and the relationship towards both client as well as publishing agents or publishers, in the sense of a recap as per previously demonstrated by some of the leading agencies that have presented. I think we're all competing heavily within the same space, but our remuneration is predominantly exactly the same. We drive a service fee or commission based, or we cost on a full-time equivalent based on services rendered by estimated number of staff required during a campaign, or even holistically within a client group. Just some of the questions that was posed to us from an agenda perspective, and I'm going to just quickly browse through these. Just quickly explaining the process followed when placing advertising campaigns on digital inventory and the options available for placing on publishers' sites, search, or social media. I have added a few more slides post this discussion, but predominantly communication strategies determine the outcome and the business objective that is required by a campaign brief. The first point of action would be starting from a communication strategy that is predominantly between a client as well as creative agencies, and sometimes there will be PR agencies involved, but looking holistically at media, not digital as a standalone, but above the line as well as at digital. Second point, OMG will then receive a brief from a client, and the following key points that can be identified is total paid media budget allocation. So again, this would be based on above the line as well as digital. The key performance or the KPI indicators that the client business would like to achieve, not specifically digital only. And then, which is a very key point, is the available creative formats and the content established by the communication strategy to achieve these business objectives. Just a little bit of a flow. Like I said, there's quite a few timelines that I haven't included purely because of the questions and the session, but communication strategy between the client PR as well as the creative agencies will then be set out. That ultimately is then briefed into an agency briefing. So again, we will evaluate the holistic budget, the KPIs, as well as the available media performance or the creative elements. One of the very strong things that I do believe, and I believe it's the 20-year plus service from my side, is the evaluation of multiple elements, right? So it's not only evaluating what the brief or the communication strategy is about, but when it comes to digital, it's very key to establish the media deliverables when it comes to the desired outcome, the client-owned media and preferred technology, which we are faced with the digital maturity within South Africa as well as from a global perspective. What type of creative elements do we have or do we need to brief in? And then obviously the allocated budget. From post the evaluation, only then media planning can actually start. We will then be able to evaluate on the core campaign objectives and how these digital media campaign objectives can be reached post the evaluation. So what is available to us and what is available to client, and how do we actually merge these two from an evaluation perspective as well as from a media planning perspective. This then runs into a hub called the technology integration. We have an in-house onboarding as well as a global technology department that will ensure once again that client-owned technology stack are integrated into systems with transparency between media and client technology. And I believe post some of your sessions that the team have touched on those. The activation will then follow post the integration, where digital marketing optimization from an analytical perspective, as well as approving and achieving the goals. And then ultimately the trackable, transparent, and integrated KPI deliverables, which is predominantly, as we have seen from a digital perspective, gone is the day where a impression counts as a KPI. Gone is the day where a click is calculated as a KPI. Over and above the DSP conversation, as well as the social conversation, commerce is also entering the market, which is going to be even more important, and I'll touch base on it a little bit later, specifically post the cookie integration that is heading our way rapidly. I think I have skipped. Okay, so in relation to the use of the AdTech platforms, it is attended by the specialist team within OMG, specifically appointed to liaise with the client and the marketing team, as well as the creative teams to execute these aspects of a campaign. In terms of the digital channels that are deployed, different stages within the actual campaign really depend. I'm going to put an example on the table where, for instance, a client would like to run a reach and frequency campaign on Meta, but more so do not own a Facebook ad or a Facebook page. So that kind of determines where the digital objectives will actually be reached within any form of an ad tech platform to integrate with the data signals, being it mobile, being it web or analytical, or even data management platforms. What sort of targeting information is provided for advertising campaigns, and what factors, influences, and bid levels? Bid levels is depending on the goal, the budget, and can be chosen from different bidding models. As we have seen as well, there's CPM models, there's CPC models, as well as CPA. So bid levels are ultimately determined by the type of inventory, the audience that we would like to reach, the audience evaluation, and also the method of actual sales. Pricing determined through DSP auctions will fluctuate from a CPM base on a bidding strategy to an auction price to a desired auction, user profiles, and other criteria. So there is quite a lot within a DSP bid level changes that could occur, that could predominantly fluctuate a bidding model. Purchase, just having a look-see at the purchasing of digital inventory direct from publishers versus purchasing through AdTech. OMG is a local institute of a global organization. Therefore, some of the requirements are carried out based on instructions from the global entities, whereby some are implemented from a local perspective. But again, very much emphasizing on what is available from a client-owned tech level. You can almost say even from a global perspective, tech evaluation will be done prior to any form of an execution. With the available ad tech allowing integrations between paid media channel, again, client-owned platforms and audience integration with third-party technology alignment would be based upon optimizing towards a set of business objectives. Programmatic digital buying is no longer a single targeted buying element or just an open exchange or open network. A few of our clients are still in the mindset of, and I'm kind of tapping into the next question, of the lower CPMs as opposed to the quality CPMs, whereby we are fortunate within the South African ecosystem. I would say about 80% of our current clients are very much quality focused as opposed to quantity focused, where they are predominantly driven by performances. And because of our long-standing relationship and culture, back to the previous slide, where we have always onboarded local publishers, news sites, lifestyle sites. We would rather partner with them and assist them to onboard them with the DSPs to still buy that private or the quality of inventory at a higher cost as opposed to an open exchange or network buy. Direct sponsorships is definitely key within the South African ecosystem, specifically on the news sites. Not so much on the main pages, I would like to point out, but it will be conducted based on content as well as sponsored content supplied by the client, where the publishers will assist us to create little content hubs within the actual website, which will be exposed to their current audiences at a premium rate. Challenges that we are facing, client-owned platforms. We are challenged by this on a day-to-day basis, and which in turn determines by the client's technology stack, as well as the media owner functionalities. We are unable to go back to a client to say, unfortunately, due to the internal stack that we are privy to or that we are skilled to, please change your back-end business objectives. So it is on our side a concern that clients are exposed to the digital maturity platforms, local and global, and platforms are being developed and integrated prior to them addressing on an agency level to see what is compatible and what is not. The compatibility of some of the ad techs that we have seen is not all ad techs and DSPs are tech friendly. For an example, we've seen that some of the Google platforms specifically will not integrate with a third-party mobile integrating system. And we've also seen some of the competitors within the social network that will not allow them to integrate to certain platform integrations. As we know, Google has been long and standing, and I think for the bigger part of digital, Google started it all. So from an ad tech, from an MMP perspective, publishers have picked up and would not like to share their data as well as compatibilities with other competing media hubs. There's certain restrictions in place of the use of ad tech, specifically to the brand safety. Creative content and formats can also be determined when it comes to specific abilities to ad tech, ad service specifically. And then data management. Data, for an example, is a creative banner received from a creative agency will occasionally consist of capturing client data. From an OMG South Africa perspective, we are not exposed to client data directly. So we will always look for an integration model between data management to a CRM data system. And that is all of my slides. I truly hope that I've answered in the best possible time.
You were spot on. In fact, you're a minute early, so well done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Leilana, and certainly that context and background is very useful for us. I maybe just wanted your help, given that you're past your sell-by date and you have 20 years experience, just to assist us on just unpacking some of the questions we have a little more. Just in terms of the ad mix, I mean, as you mentioned, companies have different objectives. Maybe they just want branding, which might be sort of display advertising, contextual. Sometimes they're trying to drive a conversion, and they may be retargeting ads and the type. How would you break up this sort of broadly the kind of objectives and where they may fit into the digital sphere between, say, search, social media, and the kind of news publishers that we're dealing with?
Well, currently, if I am looking at a holistic split, as and if new publishers as well as ad tech come into play, going to give another example as well. Google came into play, DSPs came into play, Meta came into play. So it's kind of a every year type of scenario when a new tech enters the actual industry. From both an audience perspective, it might be search, it might be social, and it also might be YouTube. So again, it would be determined on a strategic level. Should the objective be a combination between reach and frequency as well as interaction, or would it holistically be 100% performance driven? So that aspect would be absolutely determined from a strategic level.
And where would you see the kind of display advertising on a media company's site playing within this? I mean, we have heard about targeting, and I think we'll come to the third-party cookies and around retargeting. And I think we heard from someone else that this is a substantial amount of the current advertising. And that seems a bit of a lottery, because it might be you just happen to be the next website that comes along that I'm crawling. But the normal display, does that have only one role, or can it play multiple roles in terms of your objectives?
No, definitely multiple roles, right? So it could be determined and used for geo-targeting. A lot of the news as well as the publisher websites allow us to target specifically on a geolocation base. It could be based on a device specific, so being it mobile, being it desktop, and what we've seen on some of the DSPs, not so much on a publisher side, but the connected TV post our COVID scenario within South Africa. So we would place it based on contextual. So should the content be relevant to the brand, that is very much and foremost very important. That's why the hub scenario is seldomly visited or implemented, where we will work hand in hand with certain publishers or news websites specifically to create content which is locally written by local journalism together with client and PR agencies, where it will be a collaboration between PR and journalists to actually execute this on the platform. It might be a scenario where data capturing specifically, apologies, I do have something in my throat today. It might be a scenario of capturing information, again, where OMG will not be able to accumulate the first-party data on a client's behalf, where a publisher will then integrate into a CRM system. So it really depends on the brief, the strategy, and the execution. But I would more so say is the quality of the actual website plays a very big role. The quality of content within the website plays a very big role. And then the audience bucket that we are able to target within the segment of a website. Gone is the day where a website only have one tab and then multiple filtering options. We've seen this, and I think from a news perspective, they've adapted quite well. They have lifestyle sections, they've got weather sections. So certain aspects can also be implemented on a day part targeting aspect.
And I just want to pick up that. I mean, how important for at least the media groups, because we talk about news in this context, but they offer a package of content, as you rightly point out, lifestyle and others. From an advertiser perspective, you said, your content hubs are often within the website, they're not on the front page. Are those other sections do you find them fairly important as an advertising channel and for the revenue of those media groups?
It really depends on the client brand. And I'm going to call out two scenarios specifically. Alcoholic brands would not be nicely associated with bad content news. And if I'm saying negative content news, call it that, as well as pharmaceutical. So it depends on the brand. I would call it brand perspective of where this brand would like to have an association with. If it's predominantly a motoring company acquiring leads, that could definitely be a possibility on a front page. But if it's a brand objective within the actual site itself, we do get directed quite often, specifically from the bigger brands, not to be exposed to news in essence.
And just we've heard a little bit in this inquiry so far about the difficulty of targeting ads in African languages, or even Afrikaans for that matter. What is your experience from that side, from the creative side, where I'm sure you do have clients, at least South African clients, that want to speak to people in their own language?
So I'm gonna go back a couple of years just on experience again. We have had some clients that taps into different language barriers within South Africa as well as within the Africa target market that would require an execution of a different language, being it Afrikaans or Zulu or any of our languages, and still predominantly English, according to us and as well as according to the data signals, were most interacted with. When you go into a French leading speaking country, for an example, we have seen that English will then take the second best. But from an Afrikaans to an English perspective within the South Africa landscape, we haven't seen a huge impact when it comes to creative. It always looks better. It will be recommended that if we do advertise on a Afrikaans website, that the language corresponds with the content, at least for it. But we haven't seen a significant spike if we do run English advertising on an Afrikaans website.
Leilani, can I take you back to your previous answer where you were talking about brands not necessarily want to be associated with news content? And I'm wondering, does that hold true for lifestyle or entertainment content produced by news publishers?
No, absolutely not. So again, News 24 is one of my favorites, so apologies if I keep on referring to News 24 at all times. It's one of my secured sites that I normally visit. But if let's call it a pharmaceutical brand, which from a client mandate perspective does not want to be associated with any form of news, the lifestyle section or the pharmaceutical section will then be recommended. So not cutting out the site holistically. Run-off site will then not be selected as a direct buy, but a more specific approach to sections as well as positions.
Leilani, I just want to take you to the complaint that media houses have that the digital has put pressure on their advertising rates. And I think some have said, look, there's obviously a lot more inventory and so a lot more options for people. Others have cursed the programmatic advertising as almost degrading some of the value of their site, in that they could be compared, and this is obviously not the direct, but it's the auction, that they might be seen the same as any old website or piece of content on social media. I mean, from your perspective and experience, what do you think the interplay has been in terms of how digital has impacted on these news media sites and their ability to get good advertising rates?
So, unfortunately, I can't comment around the whole of South Africa, the agencies as well as the publishers. But from an OMG perspective, it's about quality over quantity within the stable as well as within the client perspective. So if we're looking at the percentage of investment towards publishers compared to the percentage inventory that we're currently buying on the specific DSPs, I would say there's about a 30% DSP buy, and there is a 40% publisher buy, direct buy. Again, with the integration of ad fraud and viewability that is also required from both local and global sites, we have partnered with certain publishers to be onboarded within the DSP, where we will then rather buy a programmatic guaranteed. So we will buy it through the system, but it is still a secure placement with the publisher. So not entering an auction-based buy within a DSP, but rather a programmatic guarantee. So it's a deal that will actually be pulled through to the DSP, where it will still allow us to have some sort of a control when it comes to device targeting. It could be geo-targeting and so forth, but the inventory will still only be on a certain publisher.
And I suppose just to go back to the question, I mean, on the DSP buys, or as you put it, where it may be competing with many different content because you haven't tried to do the specific placement, the secure placement. Is this having a noticeable impact on the direct rates? I mean, do you see this sort of advertisers shifting to saying, look, I can get it cheaper and I can even get it on that site. I just don't have the secure guarantee.
It boils back to the measurability of digital media, and within the stable, our clients are based about quality as opposed to quantity. So buying it at a lower CPM doesn't necessarily equate to a quality lead, where we have seen in the more expensive brands within the stable, where the lower you buy, the lower the quality scenario. It's almost like a blanket approach, and then pray for a quality to come through, where we have found that a quality buy carries a lot more weight when it comes to quality.
And you mentioned the measurability. I assume you still got the measurability on a news media site versus search or a social media site.
Yes, correct.
I'm also interested in the shift to the secure placement through a DSP. And I just wanted to understand from a fees perspective what the implications of that are. So if you went direct previously, you wouldn't have not used a DSP. Now a DSP is used to place. So are you charged the same DSP fees that you would on auction? Is it lower or is it waived entirely? How does it work?
So it's still based on a net media spend. So being a direct from a publisher, I'm going to call it from a CPM buy is normally the guarantee buys that we buy from publisher through a DSP. So the rate negotiation is similarly the same. Publishers have actually come to us and understood the value of, or some of the requirements, not necessarily the value, but some of the requirements that are required by client-owned stacks, where the mandate is to only buy inventory through a DSP, being it open exchange or direct buys, but to rather than secure a PMP deal within the DSP. and the negotiation stays the same. So being at 250 CPM from a direct IO sign, or being at 250 direct from a DSP sign.
So if I understand you correct, the publisher still gets the same.
Yes, that's according to the deal that we accept on our side. If that is a true scenario between the DSP and the publisher, unfortunately, we don't have line of sight of that negotiation between publishers and DSPs.
So you're saying the DSP may charge the publisher a cut from that in order to do the placement through their systems?
It could be a scenario, correct, but unfortunately, we don't have line of sight of that negotiation.
And I just want to understand what you do have line of sight of as well. I mean, just to get a rough idea around what DSPs are charging. I don't want the actuals for individual ones. I'm sure that's in your contract and it may be negotiated. But I think for the public, just to get a rough order of magnitude, we're talking about 10%, 20% of the potential media spend.
That goes through, would you mind?
To the DSPs.
To the DSP. Again, so if we are entering an open auction, it would be based the highest bidder wins to acquire this auction. And from a publisher perspective, we will have one-on-one conversation with the publisher to buy a certain rate, and that exact rate is then transpired within the DSP. We do not have line of sight of any other fees from a publisher and a DSP perspective. So the rate that we will charge is the rate that we've negotiated with the publisher. That is also transparent within the DSP.
But as I understand, that's more the secure placement and direct deals.
Correct.
I mean, if it's auction, the DSP has to make money. So I suppose my question is simply, how do they make money? And if it is convertible into a percentage of the overall ad spend that media agencies place with them, if there's a rough amount.
Yeah, so from an agency perspective, depending on what type of deal we enter, there is an additional tech cost that will be added on top of the negotiated rate that we will pass back to the client. It's a transparent rate, it could differ anything from a 0.5% to a 1.5% tech cost for the DSP to handle it or to run with the actual transaction.
And is that for the direct placements that run through the DSP, or is this for the auction process?
Only for the direct placements. No additional auction funds are charged to agency as we know. That is charged from a DSP to us.
I'm still battling to understand the fee structure, because I would imagine you're dealing with a DSP to act on your behalf, so their fees are covered from your side, or are they working on some arbitrage between what they promise you and what they secure inventory for and then take that cut? Maybe if you can just flesh it out a little more for us, please.
Sorry, like I did say, apologies, as I do not have any back-end fee structures. What we are privy to on our side is on any DSP onboarding system within the agency, there's no set financial benchmark. There is no set financial onboarding process costs that we've covered or seen from a DSP that they could have maybe charged agencies to onboard the DSPs, and nor from an inventory level. So what we see on the actual DSP is what we record back to our client, being it a biddable media on an auction, being it a CPC, albeit it on a CPM. Unfortunately, we do not have any back-end financials if they are making it from an agency level or if they are making it from a publisher level.
All right, thanks. We have a DSP coming next, which I think you use, RTB House, so we can also engage them on that aspect. But we do hear, for instance, I think, based on what's on Google's blog, that it would seem Google Ads effectively takes about 15%. I suppose you're telling me they don't charge you that. That is somewhere accounted for in the system.
Correct. It's a very dark hole when it comes to how funds are acquired, and I do believe that RTB, from their business model, they would be able to give us as agency, as well as you as a commission, a little bit more background into the financial modeling that happens between, I would call it, publisher or website and DSP, as opposed to DSP and agency.
Thank you, Leilana. I mean, as I understand, just to conclude that, is, you couldn't tell how much of your money makes it to the publisher. It's that dark hole that you talk about.
Correct, yeah.
Just on the use of DSPs, I'm sure OMG Group, and especially globally, makes use of many DSPs. It seems from what we're hearing that South Africa is predominantly a Google Ad Manager, Google Analytics market. It may be they were the first, I don't know. And I see you giving me.
Yeah.
So, maybe just give us that idea. Do you have much insight into the publisher side, which ad servers are being used?
So, again, as digital transformation within South Africa Google was proudly first to execute, I think, 25 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. They started with the search engine, then they started with the display advertising that tapped into the market. And because of, I think, they acquired information from way back when, the pot just became bigger and bigger, and how these pots are adapted locally from both agencies as well as from clients. Remember, it's client dependent on their technology stack. So we have seen that from a DSP, DV360 specifically, display and video was or used to be predominant, the go-to DSP within the South African market. But we've also seen a shift of other DSPs that have entered the South African market, for the likes of Teads as well as the Trade Desk, which are globally owned but executed within the South Africa ecosystem. But I do believe that Google used to be the strongest leading DSP within the South African market. As I've said before, I think that's why I'm still in digital and most probably still at the same agency, that it changes from a day-to-day basis. And as and if new technology, DSPs, brand safety tools, and platforms are executed, that seems to be driving demand from a deliverable perspective.
And I think we see this in many markets. If you're the first here and other global companies are late to catch on and come down to the south of the continent, then you might have a strong position, and others come late. I suppose what we also see in many markets is there can be many people coming, but how much share they grab can be not material. So, from your perspective at least, do you think that DV360 still has the predominant share of the South African market, or have you seen that being substantially or materially eroded?
Not substantially, but yet a proportionate percentage of it that have come through, specifically on additional or entering the market from a DSP perspective.
And the one thing we're lucky to have someone with your experience, in fact, because my next question is just about YouTube and DV360. Now, we understand prior to 2015, you could buy YouTube through any DSP, but it went exclusive to DV360 at that point. I mean, are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
And when it was available through any DSP, I don't know if there were many other DSPs around at that time, but did you make use of that option, or did you, and did that affect your decision making in any way?
Not specifically from buying it to where it's currently or where it was executed, but from a YouTube's perspective, because it is a video element. Again, that is determined on a creative level, not on a media level, where we still, up until today, very far and few in between that we get video elements to execute, being it on YouTube or even being it on a publisher's site in a video format. Because of the portfolio that we hold, video runs or acquires more of a CPM as well as a CPV buy, and we don't generally see great performances when it comes to a conversion level on video elements itself.
Yeah, because I was going to just ask, how important is YouTube in the South African context? I mean, we know it's a monster platform, but
it has taken a dive. And I think purely because of the economical struggles within both globally as well as South Africa, where the channel is kind of seen as a reach platform together with a TV execution, not so much as it used to be in the past, where YouTube for likes and followers. I mean, when they onboarded, it was a lot about getting my brand onto YouTube to obtain more subscribers and more followers. And currently, with our current portfolio, very little reach and frequency campaigns are executed as opposed to auction and conversion base.
And just out of interest, I mean, television remains obviously a large channel in South Africa, and that is a video channel. And so some of your clients would have videos for that channel. Are they seeing YouTube as an alternative to the direct buy with a channel? So putting it on the SABC channel on YouTube rather than putting it on the SABC television feed?
So no, TV has always been, and still within the stable, the leading reach driver within our portfolio, where a percentage of that spend will be attributed or shifted towards a YouTube element. And from a strategic implementation perspective, it's more around our load shedding crisis within South Africa, where connected TV currently playing a big role. We've also seen the likings of DSTV offering streaming packages to agencies. So we have seen an uptake from video itself, but not an uptake within a YouTube scenario. YouTube was predominantly, back in the day, most consumed by mobile. And from the stats that we've subsequently seen, it's most consumed on connected TVs.
Thanks, Leilana. And just on a related matter, I mean, SABC came and said they'd release SABC Plus, which is their own app. I mean, is that on your radar? how clients or yourselves perceiving that as a channel for conversion, because that is also live streaming their channels as well.
So definitely would take it into consideration with their vast audience within the South African landscape. So it will definitely become a consideration within the agency as part of strategic execution.
And then just on, I mean, you talk about one of the benefits of digital is measurement, which is more accurate, and you obviously need to report on that to your clients. Does it help to have a more integrated solution when you're going to a DSP, that you can get that perspective of consistent measurement across all the campaigns and ad placements?
No, not necessarily as a DSP being the holy grail to run consistency based on data, as well as if a publisher is onboarded through a direct buy, not through a DSP, some evaluation would also need to be done post the actual click interaction to the client-owned platform. As long as we are able to track and monitor the interaction post the click, the publisher will still benefit from that. So not the holy grail of a DSP, one type of umbrella fits all. I do believe each media platform plays a holistic role where, again, quality as opposed to quantity on our side still prevails.
But in the selection of a DSP, we've heard from others that to go with multiple can create sometimes reporting problems. I mean, you might use a few, but you wouldn't necessarily use the full extent of DSPs that are available in the market. Is that a fair comment?
It is a fair comment in the sense of if it's more towards a brand awareness comment to be made, where the interaction of the user can be determined by the DSP. But holistically, we look post the actual click or the interaction more on a client-owned platform, so analytical-based platform, where we will make our decision-based as well as our strategic thinking on client-owned platforms as opposed to media platforms.
And what do you mean by client-owned platforms?
So, for instance, Google Analytics, it might be a mobile app integration where a certain number of downloads or sales have actually been concluded on a client-owned platform.
All right, so this might be the client app.
Correct.
So you would look at, for instance, sales, let's say on Takealot or the like, just to see how the reaction has been practically.
Correct. So what type of media have actually driven the download, and then B, thereafter, what that user have actually acquired within the app ecosystem. Just as an example, have they returned to make multiple purchases? Have they maybe bought additional products that we have not even advertised? I mean, we've seen that a lot specifically in the commerce space, where media will drive a certain product, but once a user have landed to app or to a website, additional actions might have been taken.
I think you'd mentioned that also the integration wasn't always there for different platforms. And I think you mentioned partly about the measurement tools, whether they've got a Google Analytics versus, I think you had a mobile measurement, MMP. I can't recall what the P stands for.
Mobile measurement partner.
There we go. I mean, the fact that Google has so many components through the ad tech stack, from the ad server right through, and it also interacts obviously with YouTube, Google Ads. I mean, does it have an advantage from an integration perspective that makes it attractive to OMG?
Not specifically to OMG. I think the attractiveness comes into, again, on who decides on what type of platforms the client platform is developed on. It could be a development. Remember, development happens prior to media. So a client might have been exposed to all past history in a previous brand capacity, or they might have inherited a global app within the South Africa ecosystem. So in the sense that, yes, Google might still have the leading grounds when it comes to tech solutions within a holistic stack. But as we have seen more and more and more, where clients are not at favor for one group to actually hold all of the data. So client-owned data, media-owned data, ad-serving data. And this is where we have seen more and more third-party measurable tools or even analytical partners, as well as CRM data systems, not being owned by one certain group, where they would prefer a third-party MMP, for an example, to be implemented to track data.
So as I understand, this is a concern about the privacy of their own data being fed through a system.
Right, yes, yeah.
And maybe on that note, just to go to the third-party cookies, and which is partly about data sharing and its elimination. I mean, how do you see this playing out in South Africa with your clients? The ability maybe to retarget, is that still retained just in other ways, or is this a big gap going to be left?
There's definitely going to be a big gap, specifically within a DSP. But we've already started from global as well as from local discussions with clients, taking them through to the next step of digital cookieless world at this moment, where the focus will be heavily based on first-party data. To have that as clean as possible, to be able to still target to a level that we used to in the past, but it's definitely going to have a big impact from a targeting perspective, but might take my career back to 20 years where we just did the one impression fits all type of scenario.
Well, that would give life to your career.
So, absolutely. Let's do it all. Let's do it all again, but better this time, right?
Yeah, because no one else may remember how it was done in those days. So,
not giving away my age.
So just the question we have is, all of the money that was going on retargeting, where might it go to? As a sort of second best option. I mean, you've mentioned better data, sure, but you used to have a very easy life following someone around the web and just hitting them at different points. So where do you see that going? And in your own media planning, where might you shift that digitally?
I think still within, not necessarily the same platform, but definitely towards a more better quality, call it user experience, because of the first party implementation, that the audience segment of behavioral, and I've explained it to some of my clients as well, not necessarily that you are interested in both motoring and flowers, you will then be added to two buckets. Am I adding both those buckets to my targeting method, and with the hope that you will still buy the vehicle because you've literally fallen within two buckets of a audience segment? Or would it be better for your brand as well as for the performance of your campaign to have a more quality controlled first party data activity? So it's going to throw it back but I think from a quality perspective, it will definitely have a better business objective deliverable in the future.
So just the last question from me is, I mean, the news media are more all sort of anxious about what this holds, the uncertainty. Are they likely to be winners or losers in this shake-up?
I'm going to say winners, because we're going to go kind of eliminating, like I said, behavioral targeting that was initially onboarded by the likings of the bigger markets. So from a quality, again, from a publisher news site specifically, the quality, and we're going to go back to a client first-party data quality. So I think definitely winning as opposed to losing.
I said last question, but that deserved a follow-up. I mean, what we hear is that whether it's social media or Google with YouTube and search and other platforms have much richer data around interests rather than just demographics and the like. I mean, are they not more likely winners because they can still target more effectively given their data set?
No, not necessarily, because some of the publishers, and again, some of the publishers that have grown with agency and client and maturity, do have the ability internally, and if I'm not mistaken, and I've never been on a publisher side, I think they use a system called GAM, which is also owned by Google, funny enough, that can determine device targeting, it can determine geo-targeting. So they also have the ability, if the adoption was implemented within the actual platform itself. Hence what I'm saying is do not scare it, rather adapt it.
Well, on that note, we'll thank you, Leilana Visser from Omnicom Media Group. Thank you for making the time to come and give us that knowledge, all your 20 years of experience. And hopefully the new challenges in the digital era will keep you engaged.
Absolutely. I'll see you in one of the audience segments.
You probably will.
I probably will. Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
All right. Cheers.
Keep well. Bye-bye.
And we are now moving to RTB House, who are a DSP and who can probably shed some more light on some of those aspects that we touched on with Leilana. So I believe we have Wiktor Obansky, Head of Performance and Operations for Africa on the line. Welcome, Wiktor.
Hello, good afternoon.
Wiktor, I'm James, and this is Paula. It's the panel for today. Thank you for making the time for coming to present in the public hearing. It is a public hearing, so please don't cover confidential information. I believe you have a presentation. We'll let you run through that. We won't interrupt you, but if we can target 20-30 minutes so we've got at least some time for questions in the hour that we have with you.
Sure, perfect. So thank you for inviting me and inviting RTB House. I will share the screen of the presentation. I will try to keep it to 30 minutes, so I will skip probably some of the slides. We prepared more, so you can then review the slides later on, or I can refer to them in the questions part. So let me share the screen and I can start the presentation and start answering the most crucial parts. So can you hear me well? Can you see the screen? Let me know.
Yep, carry on, please.
Okay, perfect. So I have a pleasure today to represent RTB House and present how we fit into the South African digital market. I will be referring to some of the questions you sent us in advance in some of the slides, and then, as we mentioned, we will cover the questions later on after the 30 minutes of this presentation. So I will start with a quick introduction of RTB House, what we do, what kind of value proposition we have for our clients. I will also refer to the bidding process, the real-time bidding auctions that we take part into, also to the different ways of how we can access inventory and how we provide value for our customers, which are advertisers or agencies. And at the end of the presentation, I will focus also on the future, so on the upcoming changes related to the phasing out of third-party cookies. I think that this might be interesting for the whole commission and the panel. So starting off with who we are. So as RTB House, we are a demand-side platform. We operate in a programmatic real-time bidding environment. We buy impressions, so we buy ad placements mostly from SSPs, so from the supply-side partners. We also buy them directly from publishers. And based on the data we receive in the bid requests and on the data we receive from our clients, so from advertisers, we can assess which users in the internet are valuable for our clients, so from advertisers. And then based on all of that data combined in our algorithms powered by deep learning, we can estimate which users we want to bid in the bidding process and then display them ads in a hope to get click and conversion from these users. We've been on the market since 2012. We are an international player, and our first campaigns in South Africa we launched in 2017. So it's been 7 years on the South African market. As I mentioned, we work directly with clients, so with advertisers. For example, it might be a fashion retailer, fashionwebsite.co.za. It might be also agency that is managing the budget for performance campaigns of such a client. Our core business is retargeting, so it's strictly performance marketing campaigns, but we also provide prospecting campaigns or branding / awareness campaigns to our clients as well. And in very short, we help our clients achieve better results. We help them to drive online sales, drive incremental orders, purchases, leads, and whatever the KPI or the goal of our client is. And we do that thanks to our technology, which is deep learning. So analyzing all of that data we get from SSPs and from the client side, from advertiser side, we can assess which users are likely to click on the ad and then make a purchase or make a lead or whatever the goal of our client is. And what our clients value us for is not only the great performance, great delivery of the results, but it's also customer service, beautiful creatives, flexibility in targeting options, but most of all, the most important, the most crucial thing is delivery on the performance. And we will be talking, and we're talking about programmatic environments, real-time bidding, performance campaigns. So in order to deliver great results and great efficiency for our clients, so high return on investment, high return on ad spend, we need to be able to drive scale with efficiency. So we need to be able to find the valuable users in the right place, in the right moment. So in order to do that, we need to have many different valuable partners like SSPs and publishers, because users are simply reaching different content throughout the open web in different places. So we need to be able to reach these users in such places. So in case of performance marketing, which is core of our business, we tend to say that numbers don't lie. So in order to provide great value and great performance for our clients, we need to be able to drive big scale, big value for the client, because it's easy to assess if this value is delivered. No matter what type of analytical tool you're using, you can easily, as an advertiser, check and see if the performance is there. So here I put on a slide just a couple of numbers to show this scale. And what was important and in the questions you've sent us were the questions related to the inventory side or the publisher side, SSP side. So I would like to highlight that as RTB House, we deliver ads on all the devices. So most of the traffic in the internet comes from mobile and desktop, but also we have access to mobile campaigns, mobile applications where we can run our in-app campaigns, smartphone, tablets, other type of devices. And what is worth highlighting here is the fact that we run our ads in what is called open web. So we don't have access to walled gardens, to social media. We run ads only in the open web, which actually covers almost 100% of the users. So we can reach with our ads in the open web 95% of internet population, because not everyone uses, let's say, social media on a daily basis, but everyone uses websites and open web on a daily basis. What is also important is the fact that users, when scroll the internet through open web, they are in the exploring mode. right? So where you're reaching the news websites and you want to find out what is going on in the world, you are in that exploring mode. You want to find something new. You want to learn about something. That's why running ads through DSPs like RTB House in the open web, you are actually finding users in the right moment when they have open mind to find something new, and when they see valuable personalized content, they can actually click and buy. Moving on, one of the questions you asked was related to the fact how RTB House and DSPs in general go about obtaining inventory from supply-side platforms and publishers. What are the major factors to consider in that process? So we as RTB House, in order to be able to provide scale, efficiency, and additional value for our customers, our clients, we need to be able to find users in on a different websites they are displaying or reading their open web journey. So that's why we have many different SSP partners. As you can see on the slide, it's only selected a bunch of them. We are integrated with most SSP partners which are present on the market. And this allows us to reach the user efficiently, not only in terms of cost, but also to find this user in the right moment throughout the user journey. Most of our traffic comes from open auctions. So as you know, in the real-time bidding, you can buy this inventory placement through direct deals with publishers. You can do it through SSPs, the open auctions or private auctions. So most of our traffic comes through open auctions where simply the highest bidder wins. And in order to pay the high bid, you need to be able, as a DSP, to evaluate users properly. So with our case, since we have this great technology, which is deep learning, we can find the very valuable user and therefore put a high bid for this user in the auction. That's why, since we target laser focus the correct and the valuable users for our clients, we can skip the rest of the users. Therefore, we don't show irritating ads to people who are not interested in the product. We only show them to the users who are actually looking for this product, and we can therefore increase our bids. So our CPMs tends to be higher than other DSPs which are not retargeting focused, which don't have great technology, and that's why we can win these bids and deliver great performance for our clients. There are also private auctions, so what might be called PMPs. So in such deals, the publisher decides who they want to invite into the process. They might take into the consideration many different factors. It might be the previous relationship, the previous performance of such vendors, and typically they focus or they share their premium placements into that private auctions, because both publishers and advertisers, they want to have more control and more transparency over the whole process. So we take part into that kind of auctions as well. And because of the fact that we are pretty laser focused and we are very good, thanks to our technology, at finding right users, we might pay higher prices, because in such auctions which less partners have access to, because of this control, transparency, and because of the publisher's need, because of the fact that we are very laser focused, we can pay more for each impression, so that CPMs tends to be higher. So answering the second part of the question that was asked about the factors that determine which placements each DSP will buy, what are the factors to do that? Obviously, the most important factor is price. In the open deals, open auctions, typically the prices are lower, so the CPMs are lower. In the private auctions, it's typically higher. And then the DSP, as RTB House, for example, as RTB House decides which placements they want to buy. So the price is one factor, but the other factors are actually related to the fact if the DSP is able to find these valuable users. So if we have a very valuable user, we can pay more for this user, even in the, let's say, direct deal with the publisher or with the private auction, because it simply makes sense for our clients. So I would say from DSP or retargeter perspective as RTB House, the crucial thing is ability to find these users. So the technology, which plays a vital role here, also determines the final price that we pay for the inventory specific placement. So in short here, the better you are at targeting, the better you are at finding the correct users, the higher you can pay for each placement, and therefore the publisher at the end can receive the higher CPMs and higher payout for the content that the provider is, the publisher is providing. And we as RTB House, we are integrated with most of the SSP partners on the market because we want to be able to find majority of the users in different places and also utilize the long tail. So we are not only integrated with the biggest publishers and biggest SSPs, the smaller publishers also play, and smaller SSPs also play an important role in our process, because then we can find the users there. And typically, these types of placements are less competitive. So less DSPs, less vendors take part in the bidding, and they pay less in the bidding process, so we can win more bids in that areas as well. So I would say the whole market stabilizes and equalizes through the whole competition in the real-time bidding process. And as I mentioned, we also have access to the premium publishers through open auctions and private auctions, to the premium placements, which you can see, for example, on this slide. And in one of the questions you've sent in advance, you asked what is the role of news media in advertising campaigns? What is the value proposition of news media? So I would say it's pretty important. The news media are important because they are content creators. And what we observed is that in our campaigns, news category is typically one of the biggest and one of the most important in terms of traffic. So users on most of the markets, also in South Africa, they tend to visit news websites very often. Therefore, the traffic on these websites is pretty high. And that's why we can find valuable users on these websites throughout our campaigns. So imagine that you want to, for example, promote a luxury laptop, new luxury laptop that you as a retailer want to promote. You can do it on specialized, let's say, blogs and articles about best laptops in 2024. But the scale of such campaign would be very small, right? Because this is just one website that someone, even very interested person, might visit. But then 99% of the rest of the time in the internet will be spent on other websites. So we, knowing that this user is valuable, because in retargeting we can recognize this user through ID or through cookie, we can find this user or reading articles on news websites and therefore achieve scale and achieve clicks and potential purchases through our campaign. So news websites play a vital role in our campaign. I will skip some of the more general slides about what is retargeting and how we perform, but just to touch upon some of the questions here, like, for example, the question, what advertising clients look for when engaging in an advertising campaign and how the trends in advertising have changed in an increasingly digital world. Here, I would just like to highlight and mention something I already touched upon, the fact that with retargeting, we can be very effective in finding users interested in continuing purchasing process. So instead of displaying our ads to, let's say, hundreds of millions of users in South Africa on different devices and different channels, we can limit that only to, let's say, 1 million of users who visited our client's website. So then you are not spending money on advertising 99% of the population which is not interested in our client's product. But then to be even more laser focused, we can, out of this 1 million of people who visited our client's website, we can find the ones that are actually likely to buy the product. So if our client says, okay, our goal is to increase online sales on the website, then we can optimize campaign in a way to find users who are likely to see our ad, click on it, and make a purchase. So in that case, we are super laser focused. We don't spend our money on buying impressions for users which are not relevant, not interested in buying. And therefore, our targeting pool is limited, and we can pay more for each user. We can pay more for each impression for this interested user. So from our side, on one hand, the cost per user, cost per impression per each user might increase. But for the advertiser, it actually makes sense because the return on investment is much higher. Because they are not spending money on users that are not interested, they spend it only on users that are likely to make a purchase. So therefore, the return on ad spend increases. And it works with all types of DSPs and all types of campaigns. The better you are at targeting, the higher CPM you can pay for every user. Now let's keep some of the more general slides and maybe move to one thing that will be also important later on in the rest part of the presentation. So as I mentioned, in our case, we have deep learning technology, which helps us to achieve great results, analyze all that bunch of data, and come up with a great targeting of users, and then product recommendation that helps users to find the best product for them. And the key questions that you need to answer whenever you're running digital campaign, marketing campaign, is to whom you should show the ad, then when to show this ad, what should be displayed on the banner, and how much you are willing to pay. So we can achieve all that because, first of all, we have access to the advertiser's website data through our tags on their site. So implement tags on the advertiser data, or advertiser website, or mobile application, and then we can analyze how the user behaved throughout the user journey. And based on that, we know which users are likely to make a purchase. Then we receive bids from the SSP partners, so we don't decide in advance that, for example, we will use this particular publisher or this particular SSP. We simply receive bid requests from publishers and SSPs where this actual user that we want to target was on. So then we see this user is on this, let's say, news website. We know that this user is valuable, and based on our algorithm, the algorithm decides what should be displayed on the banner. Product recommendation algorithm works. We display the banner to the user clicks on the banner and makes a purchase. How much we should pay for every impression? This is also decided in the bidding process and in the valuation of the user by the algorithm. So this is done this way right now. And here are a couple of different data points that our algorithm takes into account when making a recommendation. Okay, this we can skip for now, and then move to the next thing that might be taken into account by advertisers when choosing DSPs. So we mentioned that when an advertiser is selecting which vendor to work on, most likely the key factor would be performance of this advertiser. So if the DSP is able to deliver results, grow my sales, grow my leads, grow my conversions on my website in an efficient way, so meeting my CPA target, cost per lead target, return on investment target. But other factors might be, for example, creatives. So you can use typical performance creatives with product recommendations, the one you can see on the left-hand side, or you can use more sophisticated, dedicated creatives that consists also with some kind of branding message. So for example, for some advertisers, maybe the video message included on the banner would be more applicable for their users. So in our case, we prepare that dedicated banners for our clients free of charge. And when advertisers select DSPs, they might look at this thing as well. So if it's, for example, self-service platform, when you cannot change your banner at all, or maybe you can use managed service platform where you will receive dedicated banners for your company. So this might be also interesting and important factor that clients take into account when choosing DSPs. Another factor might be customer service. So in case of RTB House, we are a managed service platform. So it means that whenever the advertiser wants to work with us and run a campaign, they receive a dedicated account manager and technical account manager from RTB House. These people run, set up, optimize, monitor, and report the campaign to the advertiser. And it's also part of our services. There are no hidden costs and additional charges for that. So when the advertiser is selecting DSP, he might say, okay, I would prefer to have a self-service platform where I can have my own, let's say, team of specialists running these ads, or I can hire an agency to run the ads for me, or I can use managed service platform like RTB House where everything will be done for me and I will just send my budget, my expectations towards selected goals, and consult the results and receive the inputs from my trusted partner. So in case of RTB House, I would say that customer service and quality of account management is one of the unique selling points that we definitely have. And maybe very shortly, one of the other factors that DSPs might take into account is brand safety mechanism. So just very briefly, a quick example to show how it might work. Imagine that you are an airline company and you want to promote your new route from Cape Town to Johannesburg, let's say, and in the other part of the world, there was an airplane crash, right? So in all of the news websites, you see articles about airplane crashes, and you don't want your ads to appear next to such article. So then you can use RTB House mechanism, brand safety mechanism, and avoid such targeting. So you can avoid such websites, such context, such keywords in your campaign. So just to sum up the answer to the question, how do demand-side platforms such as RTB House operate, provide value, and how clients select DSPs? There may be many multiple factors that they can take into account. It might be creatives, how they look like, if they are personalized and prepared for my company, what is the cost of these creatives? It might be brand safety, different targeting options, it might be customer service. But at the end of the day, at least in performance campaigns, the key factor is ability of a DSP to deliver results, to deliver additional sales, additional conversions with expected return on investment or cost per action for a given conversion. I think this slide we can skip. Just maybe one slide here that might be interesting for the commission. During the bidding process, there are many vendors, many DSPs taking part in the bidding process, right? So you might have 30, you might have 50 vendors bidding for one user. So as an RTB House, we strongly promote what we call multiple retargeting strategy. So even if the advertiser is using, let's say, a self-service platform right now or other DSP with machine learning algorithms, we promote and we suggest running also on top of that RTB House campaign with deep learning and have more partners fighting and bidding for the advertiser. So instead of having one or two vendors bidding on your behalf, you can have 2 or 3, and therefore increase your chance of winning bids and deliver results. So I started off with an introduction about RTB House, answered some of the questions that you might have about the inventory, buying process, about the USPs that different DSPs might have. But now I'd like to move and focus a little bit on the future. So on the deprecation of third-party cookies, I think that might be valuable for the commission as well. It's the last part, so I will try to make it in this last 5 minutes that I have. So about the privacy sandbox and what we might call the cookieless world. So many things that we discussed and probably you heard already from different other vendors will still apply after the third-party cookie deprecation. But from the backend perspective, some things might change. And we as RTB House, we believe we are strongly supporters of this change. We are supporting the privacy sandbox project. And we believe that this might work as a replacement of third-party cookies and privacy preserving alternative mechanism that will remove some of the questionable data processing procedures. We believe that generally a healthy and competitive ad tech landscape in a post-cookie environment is possible. And now I will explain why in general is it happening, when it will happen, what is happening, and how advertisers and DSPs might prepare for that change. So starting off with why, the key reasons are, first of all, rising user demand for privacy. So users want to have control over their data. They do not want their data to be shared and sold by different companies. They want transparency and choice over their data. Also, there is increased scrutiny from regulators. So we, as a Polish company founded in Poland, in Europe, we need to be aligned with, for example, GDPR. And since we are a global company, in many other markets, there are different regulations that we apply. Also, the whole change in Google Chrome is oversaw by the CMA in the UK, so Competition for Market Authority in the UK. So these types of regulatory commissions and regulators, they simply push the whole industry to go into that direction. And there is also pressure from other browsers, so Safari, Firefox, and Edge. So the competition for Google Chrome already limited or cut out the third-party cookies. So this is the why it's happening and why it will happen. And just to mention a few words about RTB House in that area, we believe that this process is generally good for the whole environment, good for users' privacy. We've been working and discussing about that with the W3C community since January 2020, so already for over 3 years. We had technical discussions with Chrome about the whole change. So the whole process is pretty transparent. Their Google Chrome team is also open to feedback, and the best proof for that is the fact that we as RTB House saw that in the initial proposals, some of the use cases for retargeting are not fully addressed. So we came up with a solution for that. We came up with our own technology or API or solution for some of the use cases, and Google Chrome implemented that proposals into the privacy sandbox. I can mention more about them later on or in the questions part, but now I think we can move on to the next part. So the timeline, so when it will happen, so it's already happening. So as I mentioned, since 2020, there have been discussions, there will be testing of different solutions, different use cases prepared. And now, since the beginning of 2024, 1% of cookies or 1% of browsers don't have cookies enabled. In the next few months, so by the end of H1 2024, the industry will be testing Privacy Sandbox. And then starting off in Q3, the CMA, so Competition for Market Authority in UK, will find if this solution is actually unfairly favoring Google and limiting competition or not. If they decide that they are giving green light, then to that process, then in the second part of the year, the start of 100% cookie deprecation will start. And in the Privacy Sandbox, there are more than 20 different technologies, 20 different APIs. For us as RTB House, the most important ones are related to showing ads and displaying ads. So to be able to run retargeting effortlessly and seamlessly without interruptions. And since we already passed 30 minutes, I will just make a broad general general things about it, and then we can move on to the questions. And if you'd like to deep dive this area, we can move on. So in the cookie world, we are targeting people one by one. So we have a cookie, we know who to show the ad, what this specific user was doing on the website, and then we can find this user in the internet. In the post-cookie world, so after deprecation of third-party cookies, this targeting will be mostly based on group-based basis, so on the interest group. So what is called now K anonymity, this K is right now 50 users, most likely will stay 50 users. It means that you can show the ad to a specific person if another 50 people will see this ad. So it won't be on a personal basis, but on a group basis. And the things that we propose as RTB House actually enable the whole industry, because everyone can use these solutions, to still show relevant product recommendations on the ad, even if it's done in a group or interest basis, and to be able to bid efficiently, so to pay enough money for every impression, even though it's done on the group basis. So it's not for single impression for single user, but it's on a group or cohort basis, and it's still possible. So we can go into that later on, but just to say like a last few words about Privacy Sandbox, I would like to mention that we as RTB House, we are promoting and maybe not promoting, but we are supporting the Privacy Sandbox project. And we believe that this replacement of third-party cookies with new solution like Privacy Sandbox is good for ecosystem and will remove the questionable data processing practices. We also think that it needs to be done it needs to be overseen by regulators, and it cannot be done overnight. So that's why this whole long process that's been already ongoing for a few years and will go on for the next many months is actually important for the whole industry, for everyone to be prepared. And the responsible governance of this process is needed, and it's in place, and we believe that it will work out in the future and will be good both for the ecosystem and for the users that want privacy. So that is from my side. We can get back to selected topics if you'd like, but we can move on to the questions as well.
Yeah, thanks, Victor. And I think we do want to unpack the sandbox a little more because it seems, given RTB House is so intimately involved, you'll be able to educate us a little more. I mean, we know that the CMA is leading this process, but we also understand this is a global rollout. So not only will cookies be phased out globally, but the solution that doesn't favor Google will also be rolled out globally. Is that correct?
Yes. This is a global solution that will be used by all markets and all SSPs, all advertisers, and it applies to the Chrome browser. But probably in the future, other websites might use this solution as well, or like make somehow create their own solutions, because they are also creating their own solutions for that based on similar approach. So based, for example, on a group based targeting instead of one-to-one targeting.
And can I just understand that the difference? And I know we didn't have time for all your slides, and we could even arrange a separate time to go into some of this in more detail. But as I understand, the browser is still tracking the user in a sense, because you've got variables. You can't target individuals, you can only target a group. Is that correct? So the data remains within, let's say, the Google Chrome, and it's still used, but you can't see an individual user and get their individual journey. Maybe if you could explain it to us.
So maybe I'll try to explain it in this, let's say, graph where we have advertiser, DSP, then we have SSP, and then we have the publisher, right? So right now, when the user is visiting the advertiser website, he is aligned or assigned with an ID, which is cookie, right, in the web environment. And when the same cookie appears on the publisher website, the SSP is sending in bid requests information to all the DSPs that this user or this, let's say, ID appeared on this website. Do you want to take part in the bidding process? So right now, it will be done on a group basis. So SSP, instead of sending the ID of the user, will send the ID of a group. So in this group, let's call them fashion lovers. There will be at least 50 people. It might be 500, right? But at least 50 people. And SSP will send information to all the DSPs separately, because all the DSPs might combine users in groups differently. So for example, this SSP will send information to RTB House. Look, the group RTB House / fashion lovers, a member of this group, appeared on our on the publisher's website. Do you want to take part in the bidding process? And then we'll say, okay, for this group, we want to bid, let's say, $1. And also in this response to the bid, we will say, and this is what the product level turtle-dove and outcome-based turtle-dove. So these two use cases we propose to Google. We will say, okay, this is the part of the code that says you should multiply this $1 by a given number, depending on how valuable the user is. So we as DSP, we will never know how valuable the user is, because this information will go to the browser. And then the auction will take place on the browser, or maybe in the trusted server. This is still not decided yet due to the latency issues and other issues, but probably it will be on device, browser, or a trusted server. And then we will not know how much the user is actually valued, but we will say, for example, if the user has more than $100 in the basket, then we should multiply this number by 3. If it's more than $500, you should multiply it by 5, right? It will be obviously more complicated, but just to make it simple, we will send that part of the code, and then the bidding process will take place. If we win the bid, we will pay the final price for the given user, but we will never know, and we will never receive the data what the user had in basket, this specific user, right? And the whole data will be deleted after 30 days. So this is also the difference. And the same goes with product level trade-off. So what to show exactly in the banner, the information about the products visited by the members of this group will be also stored in a browser. It won't be shared with all the advertisers and all the SSPs. And this data will be deleted after 30 days. So each, let's say 30 days, you need to create another user group that you will bid on. And it will be done separately for every DSP. So there is no chance that, for example, we as DSP might share this data with other DSPs, or sell this data, or put it in some kind of graphs or different solutions. Because first of all, we won't get this data. And secondly, this data will be different for every DSP.
And one of the objectives of the Sandbox was to, and I suppose the core concern was that although third-party cookies may go, Google has full line of sight, and because it has products right through not just the browser, but the ad server, the SSP, the DSPs, that they could share that data and have a privileged view of retargeting that others wouldn't, because often the GDPR as it is there, and here the POPI Act, would still allow some sharing within a single entity, corporate entity. How is that actively prevented in the solution that has been proposed, that we're likely to see rolled out in the second half of the year?
So I don't think it will be technically possible to share this data with anyone, not only with Google, but any partner, because this data will be stored on the user device or in the browser, right? So simply there will be no way in the whole process, because it will be obviously the ongoing process, right? So you create the instant interest group, then after 30 days the data is basically gone. So there is no way to somehow share this data throughout the process. I'm not sure how technically it's prevented. So what kind of technology is behind the solution in terms of, let's say, let's say in terms of security of the data, right? But it's pretty secure, and there's no way to access that. So to my knowledge, it's not technically possible to share this data from the user's device that is stored on the user device with any of the partners. So to the level of my knowledge, it's not possible.
All right, and look, we could take it up with Google, but they own most of the devices, at least in South Africa, through the Android system, because it's mostly a mobile market, and so it would seem that they have access to that data. But I think what you're trying to reassure us is, at least from an advertiser's perspective, there's a way to target. It won't be targeting individuals, but it will be targeting groups. And so to a question I asked OMG representative, the publishers, at least the news media publishers, to be more specific, are anxious about what this will all mean for their traffic and ads being placed on their websites. What is your view on that impact, given the kind of solution that seems to be emerging?
So I would say that it won't be, unless they are not adjusting to the reality. They won't adjust their marketing stack. It shouldn't affect them that much because the private protected audience API, so what we are discussing right now, so part of the solution from Privacy Sandbox, is only one of the different ways of how you can send bid requests to advertisers or to DSPs. So you can still make direct deals. You can still take part in using different APIs. So, for example, Topics API. You can still use awareness campaigns, contextual targeting, also some other methods. So, protected audience API. So, the API we are talking about with group-based targeting is only one of the different ways. Probably this way would be, or this API would be, to the level of my knowledge, would be lucrative option for publishers and SSPs to take part into, because, for example, retargeters will use this API, and from retargeting you can achieve high CPMs. So you can, let's say, not take part into and not utilize privacy protected audience API, but then you are not getting this higher CPMs from retargeters. So I don't think it will be good option for publisher SSPs to avoid protected audience API, but still there are multiple other ways how you can utilize and monetize your traffic. So that won't that shouldn't interfere, at least from my perspective, the SSPs and publisher side.
But as I would understand, I mean, the APIs, that's an SSP's job, not the publisher. Is that right? So it's the SSPs that they use will have that technology integration.
Yes.
Thank you for that. I'm sure many of the news publishers will be pleased to hear that they may not be adversely affected. You say that
yes, okay, sorry. So the whole idea is for the whole change to be good for the whole ecosystem, right? So if we as DSPs don't prepare for that, obviously the solution won't be implemented. If the SSPs are not ready, then also it doesn't make sense to have it implemented, because we as DSPs, we cannot take part into that, right? So the whole concept of the change is that everyone involved is ready, have enough time to test the solution, to implement the solution, and then at the end of the day, not to lose on the change and not to be affected that much. And from my point of view, DSPs need to prepare to be able to utilize the new mechanism and new APIs in order to target the users properly. And from SSP side, it will be less affecting them, at least from the level of my knowledge. So.
And Victor, I just wanted to move on a little bit. You said you only operate in the open web, so you don't go and buy from walled gardens. And by walled gardens, I assume you mean social media, or is it beyond social media? Is it also sort of YouTube?
Mm-hmm. So we do not buy inventory placements on YouTube and on social media. We also don't buy it on, let's say, on Spotify or on other walled gardens like Instagram, but Instagram is a social media, right? So we do not buy inventory placements there. We operate in the open web environment, right?
And why is that? So we understand.
So I would say that first of all, this is like strategy of our company to focus on the users in the open when they are actually in this exploring mode, and from the technical perspective, why we are not buying from there, or from the commercial perspective, I'm not sure. So I would have to double check and get back to you. But I guess that since the walled gardens, let's say the social media, they own the whole, let's say, the whole platform. They have different rules and of different vendors to take part into the whole process. And
how much time approximately does the general population spend in the open web as opposed to the walled gardens?
So based on the research I saw, it's around 66 to 70%, let's say 60 to 70% of time of users, depending on market, is spent in the open web, and the rest of the time is spent in the walled garden. So actually, most of the time users spend in the open web. So on browsing some websites, playing mobile games, reading news websites, articles. So the open web part takes majority of the internet time.
And included in that is Google search, I assume. That's because that's an access point to the open web.
Yes. So Google search, like Google.com or Google.co.za would be included in the open web. Yes.
All right.
Specifically, how much time is spent on Google versus others, it's hard for me to say. But typically, when someone is searching, but because it's not always the case, if someone is searching something and using Google for that, then they enter Google, they search something, and then are being redirected to the specific news website or specific blog or website with articles. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I find that statistic interesting because it seems that the walled gardens take the bulk, or at least more than half the advertising based on what we've seen in South Africa. So it seems we often talk about the market for user retention, the market for advertising, but it seems their share of the market for advertising exceeds their share of the market for user retention then. I don't know if that's your experience too, and if it is, why do you think that's the case?
Mm-hmm. It's probably hard for me to say why it's exactly the case, but from my experience, when we are talking with our prospecting clients, so people or companies we want to work with, and when we talk about this or their strategy or their budget allocation, when they hear what we can do in open web, it's typically the answer is, okay, let's try it, because from their perspective, it might not be that easy to have such a granular targeting in open web versus in let's say walled gardens. So in walled gardens, you can be pretty granular with targeting, because the owner of the walled garden has let's say pretty granular information about the users, right? Because they are logged onto their platform, and they have some kind of information about them. So in the open web, it's also possible, but it's technically more advanced, sophisticated. So if you don't have a good partner like RTB House in your marketing stack, it might be not that easy to perform some kind of actions. And also, open web is much higher and much more fragmented, right? You have millions of different websites which are aggregated to SSPs, hundreds of SSPs, and then in order to reach these users, you need a DSP to perform that action. And it's not always, and for some advertisers, it's not the priority, or it's not the part of the marketing stack. But when we are talking with the advertisers, it's never the case that, maybe not it's never, but it's not I would say, it's not a huge barrier to reassign some budgets, let's say from walled gardens to open web, because it simply makes sense to change this proportion, as you mentioned, to if the users are spending, let's say, 60% of their time in open web, you could have 50 or 60% of your budget allocated to open web. So this is the tendency that will probably appear in the coming years on the market.
All right, but the current experience is people put more in
advertisers, which are not that, let's say, advanced in their marketing strategies, because when we are talking with a very big advertisers, they already have different DSPs, they already have different channels addressed. So they have specialized team focused on walled garden, specialized team focused on open web, specialized team focused on paid search, on search engine optimization. So then they can be much more sophisticated. But if you're a small advertiser and just entering the market, it might be the case that it's easier for you to just have your budget allocated in one or two solutions, and you might select one of them. But it's hard for me to say by exactly from the advertiser's perspective the budget is allocated that way.
And just moving to your own market and the SSPs where you have a relationship, I mean, we're told that a lot of SSPs can be brought on board for a single publisher website. We're told that often you'll have a single ad server, but you might have multiple SSPs. But the experience of the publishers who've come here have said, well, I might have contracted multiple SSPs, but the majority of my spend is coming through Google AdX or GAM, as it is an integrated product now. I mean, is that your experience on the DSP side? That where a publisher site has multiple SSPs serving them, there's still the bulk may go through Google AdX if that's theirs, if that's active.
I haven't checked and analyzed that, so it's hard for me to say how it works from the DSP perspective. But it's something different, right? Because it's how we buy the placements, depending on the market. And I think in South Africa it's around it will be around 50% or slightly less from AdX, and the rest of it will be other SSPs, at least on the web environment. So it looks like this. So the long tail also of smaller SSPs and smaller publishers still exists. And for us, actually, the competitive advantage over different other DSPs and vendors might be actually access to the whole range of inventory partners. So it's hard for me to comment on the publisher side how it looks like.
No, I understand, and but I think, as you pointed out, 50% of your spend's going through AdX, and or roughly, and then you've got the long tail. We also hear that from some of the media agencies that it's easier to make use of DV360 because you have access to YouTube, for one. You have access to a lot of the actual inventory through Google AdX. And so it's a more seamless or efficient route. I know you are now playing in competition, but do you find some resistance to going with a non-Google solution, even at the DSP level? And let me ask that first, and then I have a follow-up.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So from our perspective, I wouldn't say that DV360 is our main competitor. From Google stack, we are mostly, maybe more often, might be compared to Google PMax, so Performance Max solution. So it's a different kind of solution, especially in the retargeting part. But it's, as you also mentioned with DV360, it's kind of a broader solution, right? So it's like a solution with multiple different inventory placement and different KPIs even with one campaign. In our case, when we focus, let's say, on retargeting in our core business, we just run retargeting campaigns. So it's hard for us to be compared, let's say, even to Google PMax, which is more closer to be our competitor than Google DV360. But in PMax, you also have actually probably the biggest component is paid search. So these are like somehow different solutions. So you cannot easily compare, let's say, results from Google PMax with results from RTB House. So we have to compare retargeting part of Google PMax with RTB House, right? So these are kind of like different solutions that have different purposes. And for Google DV360, it might be closer to our branding solution, but in branding there are even more different factors that you can look at. So yes, that I would say that way.
I mean, maybe because we are out of time, I'd just check first, Paula. Maybe one last question for you, Victor, and thank you for making the time. I mean, we also hear South Africa is 14, 15, maybe by now it's 16 billion rand. So let's say 700, $800 million market for digital. I mean, without going into your own business in South Africa, I would say, what do you think might need to change? Much like you've been engaging in the Sandbox, what might need to change to allow RTB House to be a much bigger player in that size market from where you are now?
So I would say that we are doing pretty well in South Africa, because with our product, which is pretty specific, we can only work with a selected types of clients. So we cannot work with all types of verticals or all types of advertising on the market, because simply deep learning algorithm won't work with, for example, with a small amount of data. So that's why we work only with the biggest advertisers, because then we can provide huge value for our clients and utilize this huge parts of the data. And also, since we are running retargeting campaigns, if the audience of the website is very small, we don't have enough people to retarget. So therefore, I would say, in order for our business to scale up even further, the whole market, the whole e-commerce market needs to scale up. So more users needs to go online, start buying online. There need to be more advertisers with huge audiences on their website. So for us, we already work with majority of the biggest players in South Africa. We provide for many years, we've been providing great value for them. And with some of the cases, we simply cannot scale the business more because there are no more users to retarget. So we are limited in our business expansion in that ways.
Sorry, maybe just one quick follow-up on that. I mean, what we have seen, we're now on a new inquiry, but we've been looking at a number of digital platform markets. And what you often see is one or two platforms take the majority, and then it can still allow niche operators to survive. And it sounds like, in that respect, you are a niche player, in that you've got a very specific function and role around the retargeting, working with big players. I mean, it seems in ad tech we might have the same. You've obviously got walled gardens which own their own, and some of those are huge. But in the general open web, Google stands large. Would it be a fair assessment to say that most of the rest are more niche, trying to find their role within this, but not to contest the bulk that might sit with Google?
It's hard for me to say and comment. From our perspective, it's not the case that we are a rather niche partner. We are rather laser focused on being the best in the world in a specific solution. So you might have different vendors, different DSPs, different partners running different services, and we want to be, this is our strategy, we want to be the best in the world in retargeting. So our strategy is not to be not to address all the use cases advertisers might have, but to be the best in a specific thing. So it's another part of our strategy, and we've been growing very quickly throughout the last 12 years. So probably one day maybe we will be much bigger and address more solutions, right? But we started off as a retargeting platform, then we added prospecting, we added branding solutions. So we are growing, but our strategy is to be the best in the world in retargeting, and we are doing successfully this thing so far.
Well, we wish you all the best with that. Victor Urbanski, thank you so much for making the time, and also for bringing your innovative solutions to South Africa. We are going to take a 5-minute break now, and then we'll resume with Primedia, who will be in the DTIC building live.
Sure. Thank you very much. And in case you have any further questions, we are open to sharing more data, especially about the privacy sandbox. If you'd like to talk more about it, we are open to another session about that.
Absolutely. We will do that. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you.
So that the red light comes on here. So when the red light is coming on, I'm on.
Is it possible to just push it back?
Welcome back on day 13 of the public hearings. We have Primedia here in the DTIC. Thank you so much for coming through. We have Lindile Ngoko, the Primedia Broadcasting CEO and Group Revenue Officer. We have Kelvin Story, the Chief Commercial Officer. And we have Toluana Ngayake, the Group Legal Counsel. So thank you very much for coming through and for participating as well. All the submissions you've made in the lead up into this and the information has proved invaluable. But I think Primedia will bring a different experience, which we're hoping. But over to you, Lindile.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you, Paula. I think firstly for granting us the opportunity to come and just share our presentation here with you. So if I may just maybe jump straight into it, I think in our opening remarks, we'd just like to state that firstly, Primedia has absolutely no objection to digital platforms and social media. We do completely understand their importance to the process of providing access to information, the creative process, as well as human connection. So we completely understand that. But of course, the world has moved on, and we see the progress, and especially that technology has made, and therefore Primedia recognizes the need to adapt to the changing digital environment. And further to that, we do, as Primedia, distribute content through various digital platforms, and we make use of the EdTech technology, and primarily because there are no alternatives in the digital advertising landscape. And as a result, that dependency that we as content creators have on this platform distorts the market, whereby various digital platforms are able to exercise their market power over us as content creators. And therefore, Primedia cannot fully monetize its digital content on these platforms given the uneven revenue share agreements and distortions in the AdTech market. As such, for the above reasons, Primedia is beholden to these digital platforms, and therefore there needs to be change. Through accurate and transparent reporting of traffic statistics, data, revenue legislation, as well as regulation. But perhaps let me take a little bit of a step back, and James and Paula, and just introduce at a high level us as Primedia in terms of what makes us who we are. So Primedia Broadcasting is an African media company comprising of 4 radio stations, as well as a news service. Namely 947, which is a Gauteng-based music station. Secondly, it's 702, which is a Gauteng and beyond the Gauteng borders, a talk station. And then KFM in the Western Cape, a music station. Cape Talk station also in the Western Cape. And of course, a national player in Eyewitness News as a news publication platform. Our content types that Primedia publishes is audio content, video content, as well as text content. And this content is distributed through various means, such as via terrestrial signal, which includes radio as well as television distribution, web, application, and through third-party applications. And maybe just to give a hint in terms of our business model. So the business model is solely advertiser-led and works as follows. Firstly, Primedia creates and publishes content and distributes it via multiple channels. Secondly, then the content is consumed by audiences made up of listeners, viewers, readers, streamers, and users. And they access this content via radio signal, web, app, television distribution, and through multiple devices. Thirdly, then advertisers seeking exposure to the audiences for their brands, for their products and services procure advertising space in and around the content. And that's simply just how our business model works. And then to provide more context, sort of at a macro level in terms of the industry, perhaps to share the history of radio and Primedia in South Africa. This happens, James and Paula, to be the 100th year that radio has been in place in South Africa, having started 100 years ago. And our history within that, for example, 947, which has, of course, changed names a couple of times, was founded in 1964. This was followed by our 702, which is the talk station, in 1980. And then KFM in the Western Cape came together in 1990. And then Cape Talk came through in 1997. And 2 years before 1997 as this illustration depicts, was when internet radio began. And of course, things started to change. 10 years later after that, of course, then YouTube was founded. And of course, there are the other social media organizations, such as Facebook the following year, Twitter, now X in 2006. And what essentially this has meant is then the change in how content is distributed as well as consumed. And then for us, what has this meant? It means that there's more innovation in the audio era, because now there's music streaming, there's smart speakers, there's audiobooks, there's podcasting, which changes just that consumption. And of course, for us, this audio explosion, which happened from 2019 and it's still occurring, means that our content and essentially our audio becomes borderless, which is a positive thing. But of course, we do have then challenges in that we'll explore a little bit later in terms of the transparency in terms of those consumption patterns, the data, and so forth. But we'll get into it now. Then Primedia's views on the trends in news media. Primedia Broadcasting, as mentioned, is a multimedia company that publishes and distributes to over 36 million consumers of content across multiple channels. At the core of the content that Primedia publishes is news. The firm views news, and especially credible news, as a public right and imperative. And of course, Eyewitness News prides itself as a very credible and trusted source of news that is also leveraged by many other news providers online. This is something that is of profound importance, especially in the advent of misinformation. And now going to a global scale to look at the context here, as well as the dominance of the online players in advertising. And here I will reference WARC Media report that says there are 5 companies that attract more than half of global advertising spend, namely Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, Alibaba, and ByteDance. And Alphabet is the world's largest media owner by ad revenue, accounting for a quarter of advertiser spend across a portfolio, including Google Search, the Google Display Network, and YouTube. This figure is before traffic acquisition costs, which is money paid to publishers for hosting Google ads, and includes revenue from Double Verify, an ad tech component which does not make share calculations truly like for like. But however sliced, the company's influence on modern advertising practice is apparent and unwavering. Meta then follows with a share of 13.5% of global spend, up markedly from 12.3% last year, and set to grow to 14% next year, as its ad business recovers strongly from an uncharacteristic period of decline during the second half of last year, and this was due in part to Apple's introduction of its ATT framework. With a share of 4.7%, Amazon has now grown to become the third largest media owner globally, thanks to the rapid growth of its retail media business, broken out of our data set for the first time in this edition. Further, Amazon's shares forecast to reach 5% next year and should continue to tick upwards thereafter. These three companies combined are set to account for 43.2% of the global advertising market this year, rising closer to 48% when including countries where their platforms are banned. And this is a trend that we are witnessing in South Africa. And to go to the numbers, to illustrate this very point that I make. So if we look on the far left column, just describes 5 media types in social media: search, retail media, online display, online classified. And therefore, these are summarized as pure play internet. Following that is linear TV as well as connected TV, summarized as premium video. Following that is news, brands, and magazines, summarized as publishing. And then radio and online audio, summarized as audio. And then lastly, cinema and out-of-home. When we look at those first 5 categories, if we cast our eyes to the right, when we look at share of total, we will notice there that in 2022, this accounted, pure play internet accounted for 64.3% and has now since grown in 2024, forecasted to 67.7%. But in contrast, when you then look at premium video, in 2022, accounted for 20.9%, and this has declined to 18.8%, further illustrating the cannibalization of traditional media by emerging media in the digital space. Publishing, 5.7% in 2022, now declined to 4.7%. And then audio, 3.9% in 2022, and forecasted to decline to 3.5% as a contribution. And therefore, this makes clear that shift from traditional media into these emerging digital players in terms of that revenue. Now, zoning into the country to look at the South African view. So let's look at some consumer insights for a little bit more context. So the internet access in the country, 41 million internet users with 96% access to internet via mobile. Social media, 45% have some form of social media and spend 3 hours, 43 minutes of their daily time across various platforms. Press media, 1 hour, 24 minutes daily time spent on press media. The population breakdown is as follows. Our population is fairly youthful, as we know, with 36.6% under 17, 43.6% 18 to 44, 22.8% 45 plus. Looking at unemployment, and this point will come into effect later on when I discuss just the impact of these digital players in their local economy, is 32% unemployment, which shows that a large part of the population can only access free services. Streaming. 26 million South Africans have YouTube accounts, the most penetration of any video on demand service, and spend 2 hours on music streaming. In terms of income, 37.3% earn less than $3.20 per day. In local currency, circa 50 rands. Broadcasting interest, 44% of South Africans listen to radio online and 40% have listened or watched podcasts. And therefore, what are we saying? So the South African media challenge, and our asks here, James, Paula, is let us be equitable. Approximately 21.9 million rands leave the pockets of South Africa every single day and never returns. The reason that this is important is because before the advent of social media, this 21.9 million per day was invested in South African content creators and journalists. Now, it no longer is, despite the fact that content creators and journalists are expected to compete on a global scale and with increased volumes and much higher quality requirements. The grip of the digital giants on local market revenue could have been defended had a significant portion of that money be reinvested in journalism and the content creators of South Africa. In contrast, A significant amount of the ad spend that Primedia receives, for example, gets reinvested in the South African journalist and content creator market, while the digital giants spend almost zero. The digital giants use and distribute our content with ed tech technology and algorithms and charge our advertisers for it. All of this, of course, has an adverse effect on journalism and the local content creators, culture, as well as the economy. But let's have a look as to why the content that we create is as significant as it is and benefits these large giants. And therefore, this is Primedia's views on the trends in news media. So radio and eyewitness news is more than relevant. And I'll actually illustrate this through research in the following slides. So radio and eyewitness news remains relevant due to its accessibility, portability, local focus, immediacy, diverse programming, cost-effectiveness, companionability, and resilience in the face of technological advancements. The three hallmarks of our radio and eyewitness news is that it's a trusted source of news. Radio and eyewitness news allows for immediacy and listeners / users to relate to their local presenters and journalists. And of course, it's a popular source for regular news updates. And let me illustrate that through research. In research, radio is the most trusted medium. As a measure, radio supersedes all mediums at 77% trustworthiness, followed by television with 74%, print newspapers 48%, newspaper websites and apps 45%, social media 15%. Please keep a note on that 15%. I'll come back to this point a little bit later in terms of its importance. And therefore, our views on the distribution of radio news in South Africa: immediacy and accuracy in news is paramount to maintaining the trust of our readers, listeners, viewers, and users. A vibrant news and journalistic sector is crucial to support any democracy, particularly across our continent that we call home. We invest daily in the resourcing of journalists and support staff, the hard costs that go with it in terms of operational as well as broadcast costs. Digital, however, allows us the message to be made available on the fly and to repurpose the message. Also, a greater level of accessibility to the message, making traditional radio borderless, as mentioned prior. However, digital uses our content but doesn't compensate us fairly or indeed at all. I had mentioned prior that as a population in terms of breakdown, we are quite a youthful population. And therefore the youth consume our content through social media, which is why then independent voices are critical to the youth of this country and our democracy. If we as South African journalists can no longer afford to publish news because our ad spend has been lost to social media, the only voice that would remain would be the voice of social media themselves. And I'll cast your mind back when I had mentioned trustworthiness in radio still being the most trustworthy source at 77% and social media only at 15%. And therefore, there's a danger to that. And perhaps just to share a couple of useful statistics to support this. 62.2% watch or listen to online music video. 52.2% listen to music streaming services. 27.1% listen to online radio shows and stations. 33.4% listen to podcasts. 10.2% listen to audiobooks. I'll again reference our advertiser-led model in terms of what is the Primedia business model. As I've shared the context as well as the problem statement, now let's cast our mind back in terms of what is our business model and why it's so important for us to have this conversation on this particular forum. So number one, Primedia creates and publishes content and distributes it across multiple channels. The content is then consumed by audiences made up of listeners, viewers, readers, streamers, and users. And they access the content via radio signal, web, app, television distribution, and through multiple devices. And then following that, advertisers seeking exposure to those audiences for their brands, products, and or services then procure advertising space in and around the content. So at the very core of our sustainability as an organization, our ability to generate content that's consumed by multiple audiences is a very premise that allows us to generate revenue. And therefore, without access to all of the revenue means, without transparency and access to that, as we find ourselves within the digital space, is a major challenge that hinders our sustainability as an organization. And of course, this is very important for us to be sustainable because our model then allows our advertisers and our value that we continue to provide for them is meaningful. And of course, I'll share the marketing funnel that they're so interested in to position their brands, their products, and or services in following the traditional marketing funnel, which is to generate interest, to drive consideration, to drive intent, evaluation, as well as purchase decisions. Further to that, what is the relationship between Primedia and online platforms? Let's look at search versus social media. Google says that they intend to make it easier to stay informed by using technology to organize and help people access information about current issues and events. While this may be true, it is to the detriment of the producers of the information that Google organizes and disseminates. In the process of making it easier to stay informed, Google earns revenue as a result of this utility. In October 2023, 43% of visitors to Primedia sites would have been potentially exposed to Google-generated snippets. In a best case and very conservative view, the click-through rate of a top result on a Google search is in the region of 20%. And just to be clear, this is an exceptional case. This means at an absolute minimum, 1 out of 5 eyewitness news searches, for example, results in the user clicking through to our website. And of course, to further expand, this is seen with the emergence of the creator economy, with Goldman Sachs estimates to be valued at over 250 billion today. While this does not specifically include news and media content, it is a clear indication that there is revenue earned when content is distributed on social media platforms. And therefore opportunities and challenges when monetizing on online platforms, including how rate cards work, as well as the effectiveness thereof. Social media products from tech platforms have created communities on the backs of originally produced content. And therefore transparency is critical to our sustainability and success. Let's look at the 3 areas. So the lack of transparency in data, in algorithms and how they work, in the revenue and profit that's been generated off the back of the content, as well as the ad tech stack being the only route to this that we don't actually have access to how it works and how it impacts our revenues, creates an asymmetric relationship. The impact of that is market failure because there's no transparency, and of course there's potential excessive pricing. And we know that there is free riding that's happening with those giant digital players using our content for absolutely free. And therefore, this then amounts to abuse of dominance. The entrenched dominance of digital platforms then creates unsustainable business model for media businesses as well. And therefore, I'll then conclude by just going to what are the proposed outcomes. Our proposed outcomes are as follows. It's equity in share of ad spend revenue and transparency of measurement. Number 2, it's attribution of revenue for content utilized in search, display, programmatic, and streaming. And of course, a retrospective view and a fix. And of course, once fixed, then going forward. Thirdly, establishing a fair and governed content producer, distributor, and advertiser relationship. And the fourth point is to create a fair and appropriate revenue share agreements. These are the proposed steps to addressing the disparity of economics in the South African digital economy between news and local content providers and international digital media players, something that has extensively impacted Primedia's commercial position as a news publisher and as a local content provider. And we know that this extends even beyond us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and lots of points of discussion there. In your submission, Primedia said that the digital platforms are benefiting disproportionately from the content that you produced, and it was of the view that the panel should consider not just news, but lifestyle media content. And I wonder, you didn't raise it now in your presentation, but I wonder if you could just very briefly touch on the scope of the content and why you think it's so important for us to have a broad view of what we understand by publisher content.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Paula. Yes, even though that the context of the conversation is around news, but as a broader content provider, that content is also actually exposed to those digital platforms, and they benefit from that as well, which is why it is a broader conversation that includes news at the very core, but also the lifestyle content in and around the news that we provide. As mentioned, we've got the 4 radio stations that also stream online, as well as that content finds itself online in a variety of means. And perhaps my colleague Kelvin can expand on this point as well.
Yeah, just to excuse me, just to to expand on that. So Lindile alluded to it earlier in terms of obviously our growing ecosystem as well. So from a radio perspective, obviously that's only one aspect of the medium. I mean, we're seeing audiences that typically they're engaging via social media, via video, shares, engagement, going to even certain events, to be honest, that gets repurposed. So to a certain degree, sometimes we would be sitting in a situation where we've got an audience that typically might not have it even listened to us, but they've engaged with us via other platforms. So that's where it does kind of start going into a far greater aspect of lifestyle, tapping into cultural elements, the arts, supporting artists, etc. So yeah, I mean, we kind of hence why at the beginning that we talk about the 36.5 million, because that's really the full media stack in terms of our offering.
Can I just take one step back in terms of the digital strategy? Just for maybe the radio stations and then EWN separately, because EWN, I think, does have a slightly different strategy in terms of how to approach it. So maybe if you could just inform the public and ourselves what those strategies are and how you use different media for that, social media, search, etc.
Perhaps let me start with Eyewitness News. And as mentioned before in the presentation, that the content as well as the news is distributed through either its voice content, which is then aired on radio. We've got video content that's also then distributed through digital media, such as YouTube. Then we have text content, which is through applications and web. And which is where it finds most of its audiences is through web consumption, through reading, through the videos that are being watched, and hence the importance of this conversation in particular to Eyewitness News. And then the lifestyle content in terms of the radios, I think they share actually, James, a similar strategy in that the distribution is through linear and existing channels, but also through web, where we've got text, we've got video, as well as audio that's consumed there. So at a high level, it's content, and then as to make it easy for the consumer to access the content, we must find as many distribution points as possible so that we can create that particular convenience. And that's the strategy, because it is essentially about the content. But of course, once we then collate all of those distribution points as well as they reach, that's what the advertiser is interested in. So that we should then be able to package for the advertiser those multiple audiences across the multiple platforms to then say, this is the type of audience that you're looking for. This is the distribution point, and therefore this is how you can get access to them. So at a very high level, that's our strategy.
Maybe just to distinguish between social media and your website, which I might lump with, let's say, search. How you see the two as different. We've had some media come and say, well, look, website is there as a landing page. That's where we can generate revenue. We might use some of the other vehicles to drive traffic to that. Maybe just separate social media and your website.
Absolutely, and that's it. Because, as I said, it's those multiple touch points. So social media is really important to sort of disseminate a lot of that content to get to some users and package differently. And perhaps if I may ask you, Kel, here, in terms of how that then fits into our business model and expand a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as I previously mentioned, I mean, for social media, it is more engagement, and the way we kind of refer to these things is lean back, lean forward mechanisms. I mean, for entering a website, it's a lot more based on intent. I mean, you're going there for a reason, and that we kind of consider as more the sort of the lean forward driving mechanism. If you look at our website as it stands, it's actually a multimedia distribution element. I mean, we've got everything's been merged under one umbrella now, offering the sort of the display elements, the video elements, the audio elements, the content elements, all within that. And I think it is important within that also to differentiate between obviously your talk radio stations and your music radio stations. Because talk, at the end of the day, it's obviously a lot more live, on-the-fly information. So it does have higher traffic that's coming in there because, at the end of the day, it's trusted mechanism, sort of local relevancy linked to, obviously, those presenters that drive it. Whereas on the opposite side, looking at social media, as mentioned, it is engagement. It's more about certain events that we're pushing and taking further engagements which have happened on air, taking it further to a different audience for further conversation, primarily driven by sort of the presenters themselves.
And just to add on that, James, there's the appreciation that there's a conversation that will ordinarily happen out there because of what's going on in the news. And as Calvin is saying, is that it's important then to use social media from an engagement point of view to drive that conversation, but then attract them back into the main web and platform for that content, to consume it, and therefore knowing that it's insightful and intriguing enough to drive conversation, especially what we're driving around democracy. We need those robust conversations. And what Calvin is saying is that even on air during the talks, when we have those meaningful conversations, we know that they go to social media and we find a way of bringing them back. So it creates a cycle that always comes back to source and the core, which is either the website, the application, or even on air. And hence the importance to Paula's earlier question around why does Primedia then phrase not just the news but the other lifestyle content? It's because all of these content types feed into one another. What happens in the news is discussed on the talks. What's discussed on the talks goes to social media, and then we create this cycle of content consumption and discussion.
So, I mean, Eyewitness News has seen quite significant growth on social media platforms, but not so much on your websites. Do you have a sense of why that might be?
We may have a sense is because of that conversation that we're talking about, Paula. So there is much more engagement that happens in social media, much more than where the environment sits. But also what we're looking for is a closer collaboration with those players so that we can start to influence what happens on social media, then results in terms of the platform. But because there's no transparency and access to data, I can't really give you actually a very clear answer that says that's why it's good there, but perhaps there it's not driving as much outcome as we're looking for. But once we hope that this is resolved in the appropriate manner, in the fair manner, then we'll have access to that data and the transparency for us to be able to drive the right sort of initiatives to drive that fix around that poll.
Can I just follow up on that? I mean, if you could monetize better on social media, would you be concerned with trying to drive people back to the website, or would you use social media far more as a direct revenue stream?
Kel, do you want to start, and then I'll add to this one?
Cool. For me, I mean, I see no harm of it. We definitely want to utilize that. I mean, because the streams go both ways, and capitalizing on that. So, at the end of the day, we want to obviously drive the largest amount of traffic to our own ecosystem, being the obviously website properties, both from a Premier Plus as well as EWN point of view. So social media definitely important in terms of utilizing sort of snippets of articles that then you can come to the website to have deeper in-depth sort of understanding, be accessing video, etc. And vice versa. You know, there are elements that sit obviously on the website that we need to then go and fetch and capture a greater audience to bring them in. So it goes both ways. So it would be vitally important.
And just to add on that, James, is and the reason that we're pushing so hard to drive audiences into our platforms is because of exactly what you say. We are not able to effectively monetize social media, which is why we're here today. And to Calvin's point, it does go both ways. If we could be in a position of effectively monetizing social media as we would like, whilst then gaining access to the transparency and the data that allows us to drive traffic effectively to our own platforms, because that's essentially what we package for our advertising community. That would then be, to the point I made earlier during the presentation, create a sustainable business model, especially digitally, for us.
Yeah, because we've heard from numerous media companies, they don't want to post the full article, but that's obviously a written thing, but maybe the full interview that was done, because then people won't necessarily go to their own site and they can't earn any revenue from it on social media.
Absolutely, which is the same strategy that we are adopting, is to share those snippets, to drive the traffic there, because that's what we can effectively monetize. On social media, we're not able to do that. So it is effectively giving away content for free when we're just taking it to social media for the benefit of those social media firms. And hence we're having this conversation that without that being addressed in a fair, equitable manner, it makes life difficult for our business and business models.
I just want to stay with social media for a while. Radio at least does seem different. I mean, I think you've repeatedly made the point about you go to social media to drive engagement, and there is engagement, and many of your radio shows will actively use social media in the engagement process with the presenters. This seemingly must have a fair amount of value for those social media, because you're also taking people to them. Get hold of us on Facebook, get hold of us here, and engage in competitions, engage in various things. So do you think you bring, the content brings a lot more value to the social media platforms than you're seeing come back?
Absolutely. So I think the short answer is yes. It's because that conversation that we have on air does drive massive engagement, and especially to the example that you make, James, is that we then also run through competitions, if they're on Facebook, they're on X, or whatever. And therefore, we know that we are driving, because this is a listener that's listening to 947, for example. And we're saying for you to engage with us and stand a chance to participate in this competition and win, go to Facebook and do that. So that is deliberately driving traffic there, which is of benefit to the matters and all of that, but without us seeing that reciprocated in kind.
And the other aspect of radio that we've heard, and it may have been more community radio, but it may extend to yours as well, and I'm interested to hear, is that radio is also creating a community. Maybe you can just sort of expand on how you see the radio and radio community role.
So James, which is why in the presentation you saw the trustworthiness being the highest. The power of radio is unquestionable, in that one, it's a companion to whoever is consuming the content or listening to the presenter that's on air. They form a bond with a Darren in the morning, for example, or a Bongani in the morning, and they have a specific relationship with them. In fact, I was at an engagement about a night or two ago, where someone who was at that engagement, and Bongani was an MC for that engagement, they said, you are what sets the agenda for me for the day. You are the first engagement that I listen to. And therefore, absolutely, so this creates a community, because then there is a focal point that people tune in to listen to a specific voice that they appreciate, that they can debate with, that they can have conversations with, and therefore there's a community that gets built around that. And of course, the conversation doesn't only last there. It actually also goes outside of there, where these conversations go to social media, which is of great value that we provide the digital players. And that community, we then also created for the Googles, the Metas, and the organizations that I mentioned in my presentation. So absolutely. It's the best platform of creating communities, and by extension for the engagement platforms and digital platforms as well.
And do you see that in your social media interactions? Do you see that sort of listener group that have come onto social media interacting in that sort of community way, discussing topics using your platform for that basis?
Absolutely, and if you'll allow me, let me share what was a very powerful feedback that we had gotten from a listener. And if I may, I'll actually reference them by name. That represents a specific community. The importance of our audio media is one where we provide insights, entertainment, and engagement to a community that is by and large very ignored by society, where we actually haven't walked into their shoes. And Dean had called into 702 one morning to then saying, we really appreciate how you've made the digital experience so easy for us as visually impaired people. And therefore, I encourage, as Dean was saying, other visually impaired people to please engage digitally with Primedia, 702, and all of that. And therefore, it provides a very powerful medium, as well as an empowering vehicle for communities, as we've just mentioning. And therefore, that's the importance of that. And I felt that it's important that I make that example. And therefore, I think it's then fair for us. And by the way, Dean is not even based here, he's based in Harare, which then also underpins the importance of being borderless, because they're looking for the content. And if the digital players are not collaborative with us, they disempower us in our ability to provide this vital and crucial service that we provide, that empowers those communities that we talk about, that sometimes we overlook and don't think about, but also in the discourse and the conversations around fostering a healthy democracy in the country. as well as the conversations that we had. All of this is absolutely critical, and that's a vehicle of distribution so that that can carry on. And hence we're looking for more collaboration, for more transparency, and for more equitable engagement so that we can create the sustainability because of the power of radio, the power of the news we provide, that they benefit from. Because as I mentioned, James, even in the presentation, is that we make a decision every single day to invest quite heavily in the resources that allow us and enable us to be able to provide this amazing content that engages, that creates this companionship, that creates these communities, and where some communities actually depend on what we do, and therefore will continuously invest. But if that investment is being eroded by people that are taking the content without reciprocating it appropriately, it is a matter of life and death in certain instances, and hence our appeal.
And I was interested in your comment about the person who came up to Bongani to say, you set the agenda for the day. I think for many, there's an experience that exactly it may be radio and radio presenters, what they pick up, do set the talking points for the day. And do you see that followed through into the social media interactions as well, and what people are talking about on social media? That link between what your presenters are doing and what's happening online?
Most certainly, because it's where the conversation happens. It's where the debates occur. It's where that high-level engagement and detailed engagement that Kelvin was talking about, which is, James, what also our advertising community is actually looking for, because they are looking for engaged audiences. They're not just looking for audiences for the sake of audiences. They are looking for highly engaged, diverse audiences. And we'll then see, to give that example of Bongani in terms of setting the agenda for the day, it's still a talking point, and therefore goes to the Meta, it goes to X, and those conversations then carry on. And of course, they'll then come back for more of that, which is that cycle that I talk about of content that happens on air. It breaks out onto social media and then comes back on air. For example, as we know, we are a country, an incredibly beautiful country, but one that has its fair share of challenges. And of course, on 702, which is our positioning statement, is walk the talk, and we actually live that. We walk the talk, and therefore we address the tough conversations. We address the challenges that we face, and of course we have these conversations. And then remember, James, is that these conversations that happen on air actually affect people every single day. 2 weeks without water, for example, electricity problems that we've got, is that even after you've actually listened to the show, even during sometimes, then you'll actually be experiencing this, either as a small business that can't operate effectively to garner the revenue or engage your clients or suppliers because you don't have electricity and therefore don't get access to connectivity for whatever challenge, or you don't have water at home. Therefore, these conversations then carry on in social media because they've started in the morning with Bongani having that conversation, or Anele, or Darren, or Lester, or in the news in terms of eyewitness news. And therefore, these conversations carry on because they affect people's lives every single day.
And I think you've raised an interesting point, I mean, at least around talk, that the conversations outside of the news bulletin are often still news or community news that then get discussed. So there is potentially that broader set of content that is very much community related.
And if I may give you another example, I know this is, if one listens to Anele in the morning, she'll address, for example, a child that was bullied at school, and I think this was actually this morning, where a parent was so aggrieved, and then she had to challenge the school, where she went to the principal and couldn't get much help, went to the school and couldn't get much help. What you find in those scenarios, James, is that there are other parents actually going through the same thing. And it's a 3-hour show, so as much as we have that conversation on air, everyone has a voice and they have an opinion or have a view or have an experience that they're also going through, which is why all of those conversations will then break out into social media, because they'll reach out and say, oh my goodness, did you listen to Anela this morning? This is actually something that I'm experiencing. And this was so helpful because I got the insights from that. And therefore, that's that cycle then being created time and again. And our content, and because of that engagement that happens on air, creates immense value, James, for the digital social media companies. Immense value, because we then drive those conversations. And we know that they benefit greatly because that's what they package, is that engagement. And then through the EdTech technology that they use, the EdTech stack, they then benefit from that content that we create. Because there's also then snippets that go out there. The conversation then carries on, but then that never is reciprocated. And remember that we then, as I said, invests a considerable amount of money to make sure that those conversations are had, because we know that our service is a public service. It's of crucial importance in helping people's lives, and therefore we continue, but we don't benefit when it benefits the digital giants, and they don't recognize, acknowledge, or reciprocate that in kind.
I wonder, and we've asked this of other broadcasters who've come here, just to talk very generally in terms of the cost of news, and apart from your staff and obviously day-to-day costs, what else are you paying for? Are you paying licensing fees? Are you buying news from other sources? I mean, what does it take to actually have something like Eyewitness News and bring that to your audiences?
Paula, thank you for that question. I think it's a great question. In that, as I said, we pride ourselves to be a trusted and credible news source, and therefore we have to provide robust news, and therefore we have to use multiple sources. So yes, of course, we do acquire content and license content for us. It's an election year, for example. That means that we have to resource ourselves appropriately to make sure that we give the people of South Africa a voice within an election year, in terms of what are their thoughts, what are their challenges, what influences that acts on a page when they get to the ballot. And therefore we have to travel around the country. So that means investing in vehicles, equipment that can also be outside of the office, to make sure that we are properly equipped with the right audio, with the right quality, because we have to take that, because we have to respect the consumer of the news. And even our newsroom has to be state of the art, because we are known for that, and we pride ourselves in providing that really quality news source. And then it's the people that we have to invest in to make sure that they also have the means and ways to create, deliver, and publish the news. As well, vehicles and licensing, content, studios, infrastructure, crews, and that whole machinery to make sure that we continue, which is quite significant. And hence I said that investment never gets reciprocated, because then the digital players take the content as if it didn't sweat, as if it didn't bleed, as if it wasn't hard for us to do. Hard, but we appreciate doing it because of the value that it provides to society. And going back to that point, that in a democratic society, a strong news force is absolutely critical in that. And therefore, yes, investing in it to make sure that we safeguard the very essence of our lives and livelihoods is important from a democracy point of view. But then that mustn't be exploited, is what we're asking, because it is, Paula, a huge and significant investment.
And are you saying that it actually doesn't get recouped by the advertising around the news bulletins or even in the discussions on programs?
From what we can, pales in terms of what's actually due, considering, Paula, that the digital players and social media players benefit from it but don't reciprocate or remunerate that content that they're utilizing. And therefore, as I speak about the sustainability of our business models, and we've seen some of the challenges that newsrooms around the country, and dare I say around the continent, are facing because of the digital onslaught. It's that sustainability, because that investment is constant. For us to continue, Paula, to deliver this high quality, credible and trusted news, there's constant investment that needs to be there. And then for players to sort of take and exploit that content without feeding back to that investment, because one has to consider that also that revenue leaves our shores and doesn't come back to invest in the journalists, doesn't come back to invest in the equipment, doesn't come back to invest in the content creators, the producers, the crews, and everything else. It doesn't come back, it actually leaves. And what we then have to do is, because of the increased competition in the landscape with the advent of the digital players, is that we have to create twice the amount of content at a higher quality, at twice the quality, but now with half the money that we've got, which is then put strain on the business model.
And maybe just to pick up on that point, Lindile, I think we've heard from some players that to actually produce the digital side of it, the repackaging, is itself costly. But some are questioning whether they can make some of those investments. They almost have to do some investment, but they're loath to invest more because they're not seeing a return. I mean, how do you see that investment from Primedia's perspective? Is it a sort of must-do, even if it's not giving rewards?
Absolutely, James, because it's a service that, as I said, that's imperative to our society. Our culture, the very fabric of our culture. News is a right. It's an imperative. And therefore we have to, because as I mentioned before, is that those conversations are breaking out of the traditional platforms into the social media space. So we do have to provide those news in those digital spaces, which then require us to input an incredible amount of additional investment to do that, because we're not just doing this necessarily for ourselves, we're doing it for the people, we're doing it for the country. And therefore we have to now take this to those areas where people are consuming this particular content. But yes, we are incurring a significant amount of investment requirements to make sure that we're constantly on top of our game and delivering content to our users and our consumers in an effective and efficient manner.
And I was interested, we heard from another radio group, Kagiso, that even on the music channels, it seems news has a fair amount of importance. And it may be because of that trust, people are also going to their social media or wherever to engage with that news. It's seen as a distinct source. Maybe if we can get Primedia's experience.
Yes, as a matter of fact, we have research that we conduct as part of Primedia. We call it footprints data. It's our footprints data, and we of course we research and we poll our listeners and consumers of our content through multiple platforms in terms of what is the primary content that drives you to listen. What are you looking for, so that we can make sure that we are continually creating value. And that point is 100% correct, James, is that you'll find that a significant amount of listeners saying that I tune into the radio to listen to the news, to consume what is happening in and around me, in my community, what's happening in the broader landscape of the country, and what's happening internationally. And therefore, and then let me engage in conversation. Because, as I said, radio provides companionship. Let me engage in that conversation with the station, but also then take it and have it broader with the community on social media as well. So absolutely, news is a driving force, and as I said, a critical cornerstone of what we do. And just also remember the history of eyewitness news in terms of how it came about. It was actually born out of 702, which is the talk station. Right? It was those meaningful conversations that said, actually, I am looking for this credible news source that I can't find anywhere else. And I know that on 702, we have these robust conversations, and therefore news is really, really important. And at Primedia, as I said, it's at the very core of what we do because of that credibility.
And I find it also interesting because we're repeatedly told that, people are not interested in news. And that's why, for instance, it's deprioritized on Facebook. Do you think that is true in the South African context? Because it's easy to look from wherever you are in the US and look at your audience there. But in the South African context, do you think that's as correct?
Well, James, you'll know this. Firstly, we're a very newsworthy country. So no, but also then to back up that point is if you then look at our statistics and numbers, and I mentioned it when we were talking about the stackable reach, to say we distribute our content and publish news to over 36 million people in the country. That should tell you something. On the website, we've got 14.3 million page views looking at news. And of course, we've got over 4 million subscribers looking at news. So I think the demand for credible news sources is absolutely there. People are looking for news, but they're looking for a specific type of news that's credible and trustworthy. One has to remember that, as I mentioned before, in the advent of misinformation, you can't really take what you'll get on social media as the gospel and a trusted news source, because you've got it's not verified and any of that. So those people will be looking necessarily for trustworthy news sources. So even on social media, when they're trying to access information, they'll access eyewitness news even through social media or through a web or through search. When they're searching for a topic or they heard a story. Our search as Eyewitness News comes all the way at the top because of its trustworthiness as well as credibility for that. So it's the demand is there.
Sorry. And in terms of followers on social media, what sort of size do your brands get?
Off the top of my head, if you allow me, perhaps to refer to Cal, maybe at a high level, without being specific on numbers, we can share a little bit of a glimpse from a stats point.
Yeah, I mean, also what we see, obviously, the spikes that drive it throughout the year, based on certain topics that are coming out. What Anele is up to at the moment, he's going to have the pink couch at Monte Casino to drive that up, our events over the years. So, I mean, to Lindia's point, not to go into absolute specifics, but I mean, we've seen sort of that incremental growth year on year in terms of followers, in terms of the double digits. I mean, we've seen sort of the past year 23% uptake on sort of 947, for instance. As we've been driving up and obviously coming out of COVID as well, audiences are more engaged, wanting to know about more events that are occurring. Obviously, our partnerships with music artists that come out to this country. So that really drives it quite heavily. From the talk ones, it's been very, very interesting because that repurposed sort of content or topics that they talk about in studio, we then kind of push those videos out across some of the social media platforms. And we've actually seen faster growth coming from our talk stations in the social media space. Once again, the likes of Cape Talk actually saw massive growth. I mean, it had about a 70% sort of growth that we actually saw month on month as we actually entered into some of the social media platforms. To the point, it was really taking that conversation further. I mean, once again, it's all dependent on, I'll go to the point of engagement. So what topic at that time will drive it? And I think the true measure for us is also then seeing, how many are sort of unfollowing us. And that is a very low amount. So it's the incremental growth off there is far greater than what is obviously those that are detaching themselves from the social media channels.
How important is Google Discover for your news click-throughs as opposed to search or Google News?
I mean, it is important. I think the challenge with Google Discover is obviously it's based on that user behavior and in terms of the topics and news articles that are served to that specific viewer or audience based on obviously their past behavior, the location thereof. So it's a double-edged sword, this one. I want to say yes and no at the same time, because it all depends on sort of obviously what their previous behavior has been and search behavior that those news articles are pulled through, and whether we are ranking in there or not, and also based on what the hot topic is at that moment in time.
But maybe just in general, have you seen much growth in your traffic through Google Discover? Because we're seeing, at least with some of the others, that it has been an important area now.
Yeah, especially that we've gone through sort of an update of our digital platforms at the moment. So we have seen, we relaunched our platforms 15th of January this year. So as mentioned, the four radio stations falling under Primedia Plus, and then EWN just got a sort of a refresh, but a whole new back end platform. And from that point, I mean, we've already seen sort of the double-digit uptakes. If I look at sort of almost the traffic that obviously there's the direct that's coming to us, but then over and above the organic that's coming through, and we are seeing that coming through. I mean, EWN is our biggest driver overall in terms of obviously the Primedia Group.
Okay, thank you. So, Primedia was part of the Google News initiative, and we're just wondering what the impact was for you. I mean, how useful was Google News initiative in improving your digital presence and digital revenue?
So absolutely useful. But Paula, not to the extent that we would have liked, as mentioned earlier, in terms of what we know, the value that we do provide. But because of not accessing the right type of collaboration, access to data and transparency, we know that we could have had a bigger impact there. So not as impactful according to the measure that we thought we would get out of it.
Danilo, in which way was it useful for you?
Increasing our access to the content, creating portability, creating the ability to take the message package the message in a different way for the consumer. So all of that was absolutely important for us, and that ability. So from a distribution, it's important. But then it goes back to the point in terms of how sustainable is it if there isn't any reciprocity. So it's useful then in that instance. But from a sustainability point of view, we are impacted.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about the data? I mean, what kind of data are you looking for, not getting?
Absolutely, Paula. So the transparency that we are looking for is, for example, we don't have a full visibility of traffic statistics. We don't have full visibility in terms of how the algorithms effectively work to drive the advertising. We do know that our content is being utilized to reroute the spend from our advertisers away from us into those particular areas, but we don't know how much because that visibility is non-existent. It's quite opaque, and therefore the visibility of the data in terms of traffic, the ad tech stack in terms of what influences that, the algorithms, and then further to that, how much is the revenue that's actually been rerouted that we actually have no access to or sight of. And that's then the transparency and the visibility that I refer to.
I think I just want to add to that. Looking at we also have to spend a large amount of money on third-party data verification partners as well to get this information. So the likes of SimilarWeb, for instance, I mean, they charge in dollars. The other day, and when we picked up something on one of our podcasts, it was Clement's show, Family Matters, and his number went right through the roof, and we couldn't figure it out because from our side we've seen zero form of any commercial sort of revenue coming in from it, and we kind of delved deeper into it, and literally came down to one single podcast, and I think that's where we struggle. It's like, okay, so where was that? Because ultimately that is somewhere a deep link that's been put somewhere else out in the ether, which we've lost all forms of revenue on from that podcast. It's gone out of our ecosystem.
Just staying back with the Google News initiative, they obviously put something into the initiative, but it seems like you would too. I mean, you also put in effort money, so maybe just give us some sense of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said earlier, James, that the investment continues to happen on our side, and if we can expand our ability to distribute content further for the convenience of the consumer, absolutely. And hence we're willing to have those collaborative conversations if there's transparency, if there's equitable partnership, and we've got the appropriate and fair revenue share agreements. So absolutely, we're willing to have a conversation well along those lines, because what we do essentially is for the user, it's for the consumer. And therefore, we'll never turn away a conversation that allows us to deliver news, credible news, to the consumer. So absolutely. But the opaqueness that we are received with from the other side makes it difficult for us. And hence, it was difficult for me to answer comprehensively the question that Paula had asked in terms of what has the impact been, because we don't know. There's not access to the appropriate data. One, to quantify the impact, but two, to drive the initiatives that will further fuel further success for the distribution as well as the access to the content as it needs to be.
Because Google, you may or may not have heard, came here and said they've obviously invested in journalism, they say. Is that sufficient?
And James, would you perhaps mind if I ask you a question? And how much did they say they've invested in journalism?
Well, that is a question. I think we were told $300 million globally, or billion over many years. But how much in South Africa is not clear.
Which is why then it's I'm not in a position to then answer that effectively, because one, we haven't felt the impact of that investment, and number two, there's no transparency, and there seems to us as a deliberate way of not providing that transparency. So how valid is that? So I can't say, but at this stage, it doesn't feel as if there's been any investment, because we certainly haven't felt it.
But maybe just to confirm, because you have put up proposals as well, investing through Google News Initiative is not an answer for you?
Not without the party coming fully onto the table to be transparent, to be equitable, to be collaborative, to be a true partner in the sustainability of the news fraternity in South Africa. Before that happens, it's very difficult, which makes it extremely challenging for us. Because as you know, James, Paula, that it's one thing saying something that I've invested, but if there's no proof of it or any value or any outcomes that we've seen so far, and then what are we talking about? But why don't we then become transparent so that we can have that meaningful collaboration? And I must state that as Primedia, we're absolutely willing to have that conversation. Absolutely willing to have that conversation. Absolutely willing to partner. And absolutely willing to then take this forward together, because we genuinely do believe that together is stronger. But also then for the benefit of the consumers of that content, that news, and ultimately the country. So we absolutely open for it. But at this particular stage, the opaqueness or the unwillingness to be open, one, to sharing information, to sharing revenue, and to collaborating effectively at that basis makes it difficult.
And from the social media side, I think we had heard that in the past Facebook had made investments in journalism. I don't know if you've had any experience in the social media world.
No, not at this stage, James. No, we have not.
I mean, because there is the cynical view of some of these investments that is helping get more content onto their platforms, which they can monetize, and hence investment is not philanthropy, it's in fact commercial.
I'll refrain from commenting on that because I'm not aware of their strategy because they haven't shared it with me. However, I could see how that could possibly be true. But there is one thing I can guarantee: there is definitely exploitation of our content. Be it there is some small investments to acquire it, but certainly what we're feeling is that they are leveraging on the content, especially our content, without the reciprocity being in place.
Yeah, and I think for social media and search, I mean, our observation has been this is new, fresh, original content daily, and that has value. I mean, we've seen in some of the sort of broader annual financial statements, their 10K filings in the US, talking about the need to obviously have this feed of original, unique content, not just copied. But if you're going to create engagement, it can't be stale. It needs to be continually refreshing. Maybe just to get your perspective.
Yeah, let me start, Calvin, and I'll ask you to add, because, James, this is what we actually discuss on a daily basis. So we do pride ourselves from high-quality content created on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on a minute-by-minute basis, because there's the appreciation that it's an ongoing conversation. So we can't, especially for our business, to also survive, but also for the consumers of our content, for them to find it worthwhile, we have to constantly feed the conversation. As the example I made earlier, that we do set the agenda for the day in the morning. So what are we talking about today? And therefore it's this constant feed. And of course then by extension, those digital players are benefiting from our ability to generate high quality content continuously on a day-by-day basis, on an hourly basis, on a minute-by-minute basis, on a second-by-second basis, because they need that to also feed their ad revenue generation machine, because they're not certainly creating that content, we are. So absolutely. Perhaps, Calvin, you can add there.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, you know, it's the spin cycle that we have to get into. I mean, in media, I mean, we talk about bought, owned, and earned media. Obviously, within our ecosystem being sort of owned, we own our websites, we own our collateral. I suppose slightly ironic then when we look at social media, we call it earned media. And I think maybe that's just the positioning that from an ad agency point of view, we've been focusing on that for too long, because we see earned as earned in terms of the likability, shareability, the talkability of those elements. So when these items go out on social media, so once obviously let's say the presenters finish off the show, gets repurposed to social media, we're also counting on the fact that it gets shared. You know, it's the party of 10, and that just accumulates over time. So it's important for us to keep that conversation going, and yeah, it's a vitally important part of our ecosystem. I mean, we have a strong content plan in place, a full a digital content team behind the scenes. Every day, fresh content has to be out there to drive up each of the shows' sort of platforms and overall attractiveness.
No, I think those insights are important because it's exactly you're, I suppose, fighting every day to think, how do we keep this big audience of 36 million engaged? But if you're succeeding and doing the content to drive that, it probably does filter out into all the other engagement channels. I did want to pick up one thing which I'd noticed, and this is maybe getting a little more technical, but it's on the YouTube pre-rolls. I think, as I understand, that YouTube has a partnership program where you're eligible then, if you have sufficient traffic, to be on the program. I think you need so much views, so much. I mean, is Primedia on that YouTube partnership program?
James, yes. So certainly we are, but what we do find is that because of that we don't understand how the algorithms work and all of that, it's then difficult for us to influence the outcome and have a level of influence in terms of those particular outcomes that we seek and look for. So we do find an insignificant benefit currently.
And there were two features of the partnership program that I was interested in just understanding more, because I think many of who we've heard from are not part of that program. But the one was just, as we understand, you can sell direct advertisers to your pre-roll. So you can say, you know, whatever brand, you can accompany my content, my brand on YouTube. And just to ask whether you are doing that and how that works.
Oh, I think I misunderstood your first question. No,
right.
We're not doing that.
You're not doing that? All right. And if so, why not? If you're part of the YPP, is it...
No, okay. So let me refer to Calvin. He'll actually have more insights when it comes to this.
Yeah, no, we are. The challenge with this is, obviously, from a direct point of view, I mean, for us to strive to get ad revenue, it makes sense for us to be direct, because then we can obviously set our price a lot higher and extract it out of it. And then obviously the other part is with YouTube, and then it'll fall into their programmatic ad sales. And to be honest, this is, I suppose, the challenge, the race to the bottom. In terms of overall CPM levels. So yes, we are in the partnership. Are we getting enough extraction out of it right now? To be honest, no, because we will approach a client, say this is the direct deal, and they'll say, well, why should I? I can just go through Google at a basically a floor price. And that really is our challenge at the moment. So we've got an EWN channel that has a news bulletin every day. Set out English, isiZulu, etc. But it's which, to Lindile's point, is carrying a vast amount of investment behind it. But we're unable to get the extraction out from a revenue point of view at this moment in time, due to the fact of obviously a low floor price and programmatic ad sales that's really kind of flooded the market, and that's what ad agencies are accustomed to.
So it doesn't meaningfully happen then. Direct sales, your advertisers are not that interested.
At the moment, like I said, it's the race to the bottom. You know, budgets are under pressure, and also it's the challenge with this is it's the small fish big pond scenario. So clients, agencies, obviously looking for mass reach. So it's the one-stop shop that I'm going to go to, and we'll and then spread the load across various platforms. So for us, obviously, it's the other way around. Come to us. We've got a far smaller pool, a far richer pool, but then again, that comes at a premium. So that's always our challenge in terms of sort of where we land up from a CPM point of view.
And just so I understand how the revenue share works on that. I mean, we know the revenue share model of YouTube on their programmatic. I think you would get 45%, but there are various scales depending on. Does the same apply to your direct sales? The same revenue share?
So not particularly, because I think once again it's a play of overall volume. So we direct. We've only got so much to deal with. they've got a mass amount to deal with, and we are obviously the small fish in there. So that model is, it is out of whack at the end of the day. But no.
So when you say no, so they still take a revenue share of your direct sales?
No. So they don't, but I'm saying in terms of obviously volume wise and the attraction of it, it's marginal compared to that of obviously a programmatic push.
And then the other aspect I understood from the YPP program is that you become eligible with YouTube Premium to get a cut of those. So these are people who have paid on YouTube not to have advertising, but the content's still available. I mean, have you seen any meaningful revenue out of that?
Unfortunately not.
I mean, we heard from some broadcasters that they're around the issue of AI and deepfakes of their presenters. That's become quite problematic, and we're wondering whether Primedia has had similar experiences in terms of misinformation where people are actually pretending to be your presenters or pretending to be 702 or one of your radio stations.
Yes, I can share even one example, and I'll refer back to Anele. I do know that her voice was used to sell weight loss products, and that was not her. But of course, it was made to sound like her. So of course, there is misinformation. There is this AI that's been used to manipulate our images of our presenters.
I'm quite interested to know that when you discovered this, I mean, what recourse did you have? Were you able to get it removed? What was the response of the platforms, and just generally how Primedia is tackling and needing to tackle misinformation and disinformation?
Let me start by this, Paula, to then say, one, it's incredibly difficult because, one, you don't know the source, you don't know where it's coming from, and there isn't a specific number that you can call to get that rectified. So it's absolutely difficult to engage, and which is why we actually need more support, even from the distributors themselves, to find ways to prevent that going forward. Because also for AI to take grip appropriately, so that it's applied in the right practices and means for the right outcomes, we then need to actually collaborate and govern how it's actually used. And therefore, that's the challenge that we still face and still continue to face. However, we will always continue to try to protect our personnel, our presenters on air, because of their public profiles, and therefore we'll do absolutely everything in our means to be able to try to sort of protect them, as well as protect our content and our voices so that it's not manipulated. I'll then go back towards something I mentioned earlier, Paula. Therefore, in terms of the importance of our news, because we're still credible and we're still viewed as that trusted source of news, and that becomes much more pronounced and more important within the context that there's the misinformation thing is out there and it's getting out of hand, deep fakes and AI. Therefore, to have a singular source of trusted and credible news such as eyewitness news becomes even more pronounced. And hence will then, Paula, continue to invest to make sure that we still maintain that, which is then ultimately is to the benefit of everyone, including the digital players.
If you're having a particular issue on a platform, would you know who to call? Would you be able to call someone and get things removed?
This is quite a challenging item because usually it's a help desk email address that we have to then go through, log, and yeah, I mean, sometimes there'll be days on end without response in terms of where we are, in terms of the priority list.
And just to add, that's been an overall challenge. We've seen that even through the Department of Communications, one of the initiatives that they've really promoted has been around public awareness. But at the same time, with public education campaigns, they've encouraged the platforms themselves to be part of these initiatives so that consumers and users of their platforms can be empowered in terms of recourse. We know that in terms of legislation, there is, in terms of the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act, a takedown process. But again, that's subject to whether or not that particular entity is a member of ISPA, because then that's really where there's a clear sense of regulation. We know the Film and Publication Board has also promulgated the Film and Publication Amendment Act that also sought to try and ensure that there is speedy redress around taking down of content or addressing some of the issues that consumers or users of the platforms may encounter from time to time. But as Kelvin has said, it is ultimately quite difficult. Even if there is a contact person that we would have a relationship with, it would still have to be rerouted through the proper channels. And this is a global platform. So a complaint from Primedia is but one in a plethora of other content-related matters that they would be considering.
Can I just get clarity, Tuluana? You have to be a member of ISPA even to be subject to the takedown rule.
I was saying in terms of the platforms themselves, the internet service provider would have to be part of ISPA, and they would be subject to the takedown process. So it's not so much from a consumer perspective, but more from an internet service provider perspective. So what I was saying was it's very limited in that the takedown process that is articulated in the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act is more clearly articulated in terms of members of ISPA, but that's only one subset in terms of global platforms themselves. So if it was something pertaining to content on Google, to use that as an example, or perhaps Instagram, that would not necessarily be subject to the takedown process that we find in ECTA. So we would therefore be reliant on engaging with the platforms. And as Kelvin has indicated, that recourse in itself is sometimes not speedy, it's not transparent, and doesn't necessarily always yield the desired outcome.
And if they ignored that, would we have any legal recourse?
In principle, there's legal recourse in terms of the Film and Publication Board, but ultimately it still rests on the responsiveness of the platforms themselves. And we've seen that these are some of the issues that the Department of Communications has also taken up in the draft white paper. However, that's still a policy process. It still has to be translated into legislation, and there are various pieces of legislation that would be impacted. So whilst the principle of it in current pieces of legislation is that there is some level of recourse, and again, it depends on the type of content, because if we look at the Film and Publication Act, it's specific to the types of content that can then be subject to the takedown regime there. And issues really around misrepresentation of a character, misrepresentation of a brand, issues pertaining to deepfakes, those wouldn't be covered by the scope of the Film and Publication Act. And so, again, we ultimately are left with little to no recourse and an entire dependency on the internal processes of the platforms themselves. And then we know they've got their own community norms and standards, which is what they would always judge the content complained of against. And there have been some instances where a response would be this particular type of content does not necessarily violate our community norms and standards. That's if we get a response. And so again, it goes back to there isn't really any effective recourse mechanisms that are available. And this is really a response not in terms of Primedia as such, but as consumers at large of these digital platforms.
And I just wanted to go back to some of the deepfake and audio, in your case, deepfake. I mean, we've heard the investment stuff, but we are going into an election. Have you faced, or do you think you may face, instances where, like, Bongani's voice is being used to give a fake story or fake perspective or punt a political party? Or
no. So think maybe to take a step back and just reinforce that we also understand the importance of the period that we're in from a democratic point of view, and referring back to the investments that we're making to make sure that we continue to deliver credible news sources from credible journalists. And that's an investment that we continue to do, just to make sure that we uphold the right conversations, democratic conversations. So no, and that's largely due to the point that we are a trusted voice. We are a trusted news provider, credible, and therefore we'll continue to invest to make sure that that happens.
Yeah, supposedly, Ndile, the question is more, could the AI be used to fake the voice, to provide almost disinformation, rather than just some investment scheme? Do you see that as a risk, where you have no control because some AI's clearly copied Anele's voice and maybe Bungani's voice?
Could I add to that? I mean, so what is the cost of prepping your journalists to deal with misinformation and disinformation during the elections? I mean, one of the things that I'm mindful of is that you're increasingly using WhatsApp voice notes and to be able to get more people on air, etc. I mean, what are the checks and balances that you have to put in place to make sure that the news that ultimately goes on air or on one of your platforms has been verified? And what's the cost from that, not just in terms of monetary value, but in terms of the extra steps that have to be taken to ensure that the information that's being spread on social media is in fact true?
Thanks for that. So I think I'll answer both of those questions by saying that there's two processes. The first one is rigor that we apply to our newsroom, as well as our content creation, as well as at the stations. So we do apply a very high level of rigor. And quality checks and all of that. And of course, we do have constant conversation with our on-air presenters, as well as any content that comes out in terms of the importance of quality content, credible and trusted, and therefore we provide those rigors through various steps to make sure that we do that. So one is rigor, and then the other one is an ability to listen to what's out there. Because it's a continuous conversation, Paula, we have to sort of listen out to what's happening out there. So if we will then find something that is not of us or is aligned with us, we've got means and ways to then address it effectively, quickly. And those two sort of guardrails are extremely important from an integrity point of view, as well as the quality of the content that we produce. And therefore, I said I'll answer both of them. James, I suppose there's always a risk, but of course we try as best as we can to mitigate the risk because of the importance of our voices and for them to stay as credible as they are. And therefore we'll do whatever is absolutely necessary to make sure that those risks are mitigated. And then that second guardrail of our ability to listen out what's there, either digitally, audio and video, is to make sure that we've got control of what gets out, but also what's already out, to just make sure that our content remains and retains its quality out there.
And if I may add to the response to Paula's question around the cost of prepping journalists, and it's not so much a cost, but it's also worth noting that Primedia across all of its content distribution platforms is actually subject to a number of regulations. It's also subject to a number of codes. There's the BCCSA Code of Conduct, there's the Press Code. We now have ICASA having issued its elections regulations. And so we hold ourselves also to those particular standards, not only because it's a license condition, but because we recognize that whilst we do have the rights that we enjoy in terms of the Constitution, there comes obligations and responsibilities, and we have to operate within those parameters. And there's a cost also to compliance with these regulations, as well as the plethora of codes, some of which actually emanate outside of ICASA's purview. Even in terms of advertising, there's regulation there. And so when we think about costs in that perspective, we must also consider the cost of compliance. And as we note, these digital platforms up until recently have been generally unregulated. And I simply say up until recently because there's only recently been an appreciation for content regulation on their aspect. But if we consider the need to actually contribute to the fiscus, issues around payment of royalties, ensuring that there's a minimum number of South African local content, all of which costs us as distributors, they actually don't carry the same costs because they don't have the same obligations. So the disparity is also in relation to how they're regulated and how over and above ensuring that we are able to execute our strategy, ensuring our ability to ensure that we've got original, relevant, current content. We also have 4 licenses that we need to comply with. We also have the press code that's specifically applicable to EWN as a platform as well.
Well, I think we have no more questions. We don't want to stand between you and your Human Rights Day celebrations tomorrow. And it is maybe apt that we have that pause for Human Rights Day in the midst of these public hearings. So I do want to thank Lindile, Toloana and Kelvin for coming in. And as I said, for all the submissions and inputs and insights. I think it has been particularly insightful for today, especially around the community building and the kind of radio role within the broader ecosystem, I think is particularly important. We are going to pause for the rest of this week. We're going to take the long weekend. I hope many others will as well. But on Monday, we are back with OpenAI, so we just have an evening session for an hour and a half. On Tuesday, we have YouTube and AdTech, and that's a fairly long session running from 4:30 through to 9:30. And then on Wednesday, we have eMedia and YFM, who were rescheduled in the afternoon, and then Meta in the evening. But we will release the exact times and schedule for next week. But with that, we will close the 3rd week of the public hearings. Thank you.